Ms. Jacobson, Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli, and Mr. Peterson. Ask you all to please rise for the pledge. Ms. Jacobson, will you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a full agenda. This was supposed to be our town hall, but Mother Nature got in the way of our last two meetings, and snow is on the way again, believe it or not. But so we're going to try to be as efficient as possible. So with that, approval of collective bargaining agreement between the Fairfield School Administrators Association and the Board of Education, July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2023. The recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the collective bargaining agreement between the Fairfield School Administrators Association and the Board of Education, July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2023. Can I have a motion? Mr. Peterson, second. Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli. Mr. Peterson, before, I would like to thank you for being the board liaison to this bargaining unit. Thank you for all your hard work, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just have to say that as the liaison to this negotiation, I recommend the passage of this motion.
Being this is a personnel matter, we will not be having any discussion or going to the public on this. We're going to go straight to a vote. All in favor? Ms. Pitko, Ms. Leeper, Mr. Dwyer, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Vitale, Mr. Asa, Ms. Jacobson, Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli, Mr. Peterson. The motion passes 9-0. Thank you. Next, Roger Sherman Building Committee, project update, Mr. Eric Lang and friends. Please state your name for the record.
Sure. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Lang. Thank you for having me. I'm the chair of the Roger Sherman Building Committee Phase 3. With me is Mark Schweitzer from Colliers International, who is the owner's rep on the job. As a quick update, for the past 8 months, the committee's been meeting in an effort to execute the charge of the project, which includes, in a nutshell, the movement of the bus queue on site, along with the separation of the parent drop-off area, the addition of a new music room for wind and string instruments, and the addition of a new stage onto the gym, as well as air conditioning for the entire building and various life safety upgrades, including a new sprinkler system for the main building and fire alarm and security and ADA access upgrades. Last month, in January, we received our initial cost estimate from the architect and engineers, which, as many of you have probably heard at this point, came in significantly over budget by about $1 million. As a result, over the past month or so, the committee has been looking at various ways to rein that in and get the project back on budget and back on track. Sherman is a unique school in the district, being that it is in the FEMA floodplain. As a result, we have restrictions, budgetary restrictions that many of the other schools do not. And that has been our focus over the past month, is identifying either areas where we could value engineer the design to this point to get it back on budget, or areas where we could potentially, or where we would potentially need to reduce scope. The main reason I'm here tonight is to get input from the board as to what the priorities are, as well as provide my or the committee's recommendations for areas where we think we can reduce scope to meet the FEMA budget. I believe at this point in front of you, you should all have a copy of the budget that kind of highlights what we are looking at to bring the project back on budget. And in a nutshell, that is, or that requires the removal of the stage addition to the project in order to provide the other parts of the ed spec that are, or what we understand to be the priority. If you, going into a little bit more detail, and stop me if anyone has any questions, what we have, what we've encountered is essentially the cost of the HVAC and various life safety system upgrades is going to account for the majority of the budget that was allocated for this project. We've got about $2 million in costs of just the HVAC alone for classrooms, gym, APR, and various administrative spaces. And when you factor in the other life safety components, we approach very closely that $2.6 million FEMA cap. Any questions at this point?
Mrs. Max Cannelli?
I don't have any questions, and obviously I would be certainly open to being directed by staff and Mr. Cullen and the principal there, but if I were to prioritize, my priority would be getting the air there. So that's the benefit to all, immediate benefit to all there. Everything else here, I mean, we knew when we approved this that we were perhaps looking at needing to add another phase if need be. But if I were to prioritize, I would agree that air is what we need to go with first to maintain in the ed specs.
Ms. Pitko?
Just want to say that I agree with Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
And Mr. Asa?
So when we originally approved this ed spec, we had a long discussion back and forth. And Mr. Cullen, would it be okay through the chair to direct a question to him?
Yeah.
So we have right here this number, FEMA max limit of 2610850, correct? Was there discussion that some of this work did not trigger that limit, so we were looking at a budget already that was higher than that because some of the things didn't count towards that limit?
Correct.
Okay, so of the things we're talking about now to the building chair, or any of those things that you're talking about, like the stage and whatnot, I'm guessing the stage is FEMA triggering, but what are some of the other things that you have here that you're talking about possibly eliminating or value engineering that don't go with this? Because when someone were to look at this at a grand total budget of 3.2 million, but a FEMA cap of 2.6, you kind of roll your eyes and be like, what? So if maybe you could, either Mr. Cullen or you could elaborate on that for my first question, that would be great.
I don't have the list with me.
Yep, I could take this. What I will point your attention to is the second column from the right, which Well, actually, I mean, let's do the last column, the conceptual design, FEMA. It has two columns under there. One says included, one says excluded. Included are those items that are, that fall under the FEMA restriction. The excluded items are those that do not.
Okay.
So if you, so moving over to that allocated FEMA column, that is the initial budget and how the initial budget line items break down into the FEMA cap and the non-FEMA cap items. So, so you'll see essentially the only two things that are not restricted by FEMA are the site work and the soft costs, architecture, engineering fees, and so on and so forth.
Okay. So when we look over in that last column all the way down on the bottom, is this basically telling us, can you explain what these numbers are? Is it 888,000 over the limit or what?
Yes, so the items in green are the items that we have identified to propose to continue to pursue that we believe will bring the project on budget. The items in white are the ones that we are proposing to eliminate. Likewise, when you get down to the bottom with the various totals and subtotals, the items in green are those that subtotal the items above in green. The items in white are the overall totals that we received from the architect.
Okay, so under HVAC equipment controls, line 9, are you taking that where you said here, and as part of the capital non-recurring? Is that what you're saying, that this should be going to that?
Yes, so that that item at $240,000 was the cost to upgrade the existing EMS system for all the existing infrastructure. The new HVAC, the proposed new HVAC controls are in the are broken out in line item 9B. So that would be included and would be necessary as part of the new air conditioning that we'd
So-
be installing in the school.
So what happened? If we're talking about the existing infrastructure and everything, I thought we did some work there already. Is that work null, or can it not be used towards this?
So the system that was installed under Phase 2 was a fresh air system that was bringing fresh air into the building through rooftop units. And that's fresh air only, ventilation only. I don't believe any heating was produced through that. The building currently is heated through heated by perimeter fin coil.
Yeah.
Baseboard
heat.
Baseboard heat. That fresh air system will be utilized in the design, but it limited the types of equipment that we would be able to use to take advantage of it. So the proposed system is a VRF system, variable refrigerant flow system, which utilizes and taps into that fresh air to provide fresh air through the air handler units. So we are using it, but it kind of dictated that this was the system that we would need to use. This system is widely used for various uses. is incredibly energy efficient, but it also has a higher upfront cost than some of the alternatives that we would not really be able to take advantage of, given that we had this system in place from phase 2.
So I know this might sound counterintuitive, but I'm assuming you guys looked at the idea, because it sounds like integrating this system in comes with a cost and an infrastructure that may kind of tie your hands a little bit, per se. If we weren't incorporating this system into it, which I hate the idea of that, would it change drastically the line 1 and 2 costs? Are we handicapping ourselves financially here by making sure that we're tying into something that doesn't sound like it might not have been, the long-range plan may not have fit like we had hoped? So
We did discuss that early on in the process. You know, on a per ton basis, you know, this is a more expensive system, but the opinion was that when you factor in the removal of that existing system and replace it with, let's say, packaged rooftop units, the cost would not, the cost wouldn't be greater than what we're looking at today.
okay, so it'd be less than $240,000 in savings.
Correct. Well, less than 200. The $240,000 is more of a control.
I understand that, but I'm saying that you're saying these controls are required because of the old system. So if we were taking,
The new system they picked.
sorry, I misunderstood. I
yeah.
thought you said that the bulk of this cost was to make sure that we were able to integrate the old system with the new system. Did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, it's, sorry, I probably wasn't very clear. The $240,000 is to tie in all of the systems. So not only, it's not to tie in the fresh air into the new proposed VRF. It's to tie in the baseboard heat with the VRF and the fresh air.
So that is going to be a necessary expense.
It would be.
So how do we put it in white if that's a necessary expense?
It would be necessary if you wanted a building-wide control system. So you can control these systems independently, as the building currently is, with the fresh air and the baseboard heat. And we would continue to operate in a similar manner, only now the fresh air is tied into the VRF system. So you would have a control system for the ventilation and AC component, and you would have a separate control system, thermostat, for the baseboard heat.
Okay, so to Mr. Cullen, does that kind of go against what we've been hearing of what we've been trying to do with these new controls and remote controlling the entire school and whatnot? Will we still be able to do that with this project, like we're trying to integrate through other expenses at other schools?
Yes, we will.
Okay, so we would have full functionality and control of the school just like we are in the other ones that we're investing in?
Yes.
Okay, so,
And I just said, Nick, this, and Mr. Cullen, correct me if I'm wrong, part of the 240 is for upgrades that are currently in the capital waterfall, correct, for Sherman, the BMS monitoring?
They are. I just don't know if they're currently in the waterfall because the BMS upgrade is 20 years long. The waterfall's only 10. So
I
I've
thought
got
part
to
of the
see
system
if
was the one that
Sherman's
was
in there.
that on 2023.
I'd have to
Sherman?
look at it. If you've looked at it and you saw it, then yes.
Yeah,
Just don't have it in front of me.
so I think it's almost a duplication of something that we were planning to do. So it just is showing up here sooner.
okay. Where is it?
2023.
Okay.
So with regards to the, if you don't mind, Chair, can I keep going?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify
Yeah,
that
yeah,
in
no,
terms
no,
of
no.
that,
I just
it
didn't know
is
if
being
you-
addressed, and...
I've had a number of questions, so I don't know if you want to give anybody
no,
else a chance.
No.
Okay.
Finish up.
So with regards to the new stage addition off the gymnasium and the vestibule, I'm trying to look at those in the ed specs, or to try and find them in the ed specs, and I may be a little confused or something, but where does that fall in there?
So under the common core spaces, an area of assembly seating, 550 plus or minus, and a stage, sufficient and conveniently located student lavatories. So the only space currently in the building that can accommodate even close to that number is the gym.
Okay.
The APR does not have that capacity. So what we've been exploring was the removal of the stage in the APR to provide some, or to create the music room for band and string instruments, as well as provide flexibility for expanding that APR in the future as the population of the school increases. And that is what prompted the stage addition to the gym as the most logical place to put it.
So if we didn't move it, would it be staying where it is, or would it be demolished and there'd be no gym? I mean, no stage?
That is something that, you know, we haven't come to a resolution on. And I think it's, you know, a question that I would put back to the board is that as I understand it, the gym is currently used for some large gatherings and makes use of various risers and what have you. And the question is, could we continue to do that and remove the existing stage, create the flexibility for the expansion of the APR all at one level, as well as create that separate room for band and string instruments.
So I guess I would say to the board, my concern with that, and correct me if I'm wrong, with all of these other projects and our ed specs that we've been doing, I thought we were trying, I mean, Sherman's a little different because we're tied with FEMA and everything, but I thought we were trying to make it as close to possible. When you go to one school, it has, you know, X, and the next school has X, and the next school has X. By doing this, would we be making this school an outlier after spending money on a renovation and then not having what the other schools have? I don't know if anybody can answer that.
Yes.
You're right.
So I don't see how I could support removing a stage when we're putting and making sure that all the other schools have it. However, I understand the cost of moving this and whatnot. So to me, this is, I have a couple things. I have this $240,000, which is hitting me in the head like a metal hammer, because I can't get over the fact that, and this isn't to you as the building committee, but maybe to Mr. Cullen, I want to know what happened. Like, how did we spend all that money on this fresh air system? I don't remember what it was. I wasn't on the board then, but I do remember, I think it was quite a bit of money. And when we went for that money, when the board went for that money, they did it on the premise that this is going to be tied in to the next system. So now we're looking at, you know, all of this money to do that. I want to make sure we're trying to figure out what happened here, because we're talking about doing an evaluation of schools and HVAC and putting together a proposal and spending money on consultants. And one of the things that came up in that conversation was we want to make sure that when we do something that it's going to work in the future. So I have some serious concerns over here, and I'd just like to know if you have any insight as to what happened here, because other town bodies that approve this money for that system are going to be shaking their heads, and I think we'd owe them an answer.
Yeah, I don't have all the answers for you about what happened. We were told that the mechanical means of fresh air system, it would be very easy in the future to add AC to it. I think that was just verbally. There wasn't really a lot of hands-on work done to research that. So looking at the old schools we've got, a lot of them have the perimeter heat. They pretty much, it's easier to stay with that perimeter heat and have it stand alone than to replace the heating portion. The mechanical means of fresh air is easy to do when you do air conditioning at the same time. If the roof structure can hold it, you know, you're taking down all the ceilings and doing it all at once. So I think they were looking at the mechanical means of fresh air was done. Now things are buttoned up. What's the best economical way to add air conditioning to that school building? And it was decided that it was best to have a separate system than to start tearing apart what was already done.
Okay. I would request that we dig deeper into this so we don't make this mistake again, please, because it's very concerning to me. And with regards to the rest of it, yes, go
I
ahead.
have one other comment just that we passed over and I wanted to bring up. When I talked with Jim Went long ago, the project contingency, if it's not used, is excluded from FEMA. And even if it is used, we would need to look at and see if it complies with what we used it for to put it in the FEMA column. So I know it's probably a long shot we won't use the contingency, but in case we don't, that's $150,000 that would move over to the other column.
Well, I remember you sitting at this table and you and I having a nice back and forth when we were talking about this project, because I didn't believe there was any way we could get this phase done in this budget. And that's where we're at now.
Yeah.
So to me, I would echo what Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli and Ms. Pitko said. I absolutely think HVAC is the priority here. This site work, I would like just a little bit brief description of why we're looking at over $100,000 more in site work. I'm interested in that. And some of these other things. The stage concerns me. I don't think we should eliminate a stage and not do a future phase where we bring this school as close to common as the other schools as we can. It's not going to be a 504 school. It's not going to, so we know that. But if we have made a decision that we're trying to put certain things and make sure certain schools, I want to make sure that it's equitable. So I don't know if that helps you with the direction or not, but that's, you know, that's it. So I guess my last question would be, even though this isn't tied to the FEMA, what are we looking at with this parking lot upgrades? Why are we so far off budget?
Okay, so the committee spent considerable time and effort with our architects and civil engineers exploring. I think we wound up over 13 different options for the bus and stop, kiss, and go configuration.
Sorry, could you explain kiss and go?
You're a parent in Fairfield, you know.
I'm saying that all joking aside, so the public that doesn't know, that needs to be informed in this process, can understand that. I get it.
Okay.
But a lot of the public may not.
Okay, so Stop, Kiss, and Go is an area where parents driving in cars can pull up, drop their children off without getting out of the car, and leave them in the care of a school staff to then bring them into the building, and the opposite at the end of the day. So getting back to the process, we looked at 13 different options and had numerous meetings, not only our own meetings, but with various town entities, including the fire department, the police department, the tree warden, conservation, looking at various issues that we were encountering around the site. The initial approach was based on a study that was done back in 2010, where the police department recommended a drop-off off of Fern Street that would, which we've come to refer to as the airport scheme, where you just have a little curb cut, you pull in. I think there was a queue for about 7 cars, and you drop the students off at that location, and they're on their way. That proposal, that was our starting point, but that proposal ran into some issues out of the gates One, that there was a fire hydrant on the sidewalk in that location, as well as two electrical poles, all of which would need to be relocated. There's also a water meter vault that serves the school in that location as well. In addition, there's multiple large old trees in that location, the concern of the tree warden. So when we were looking at all these schemes, the cost that we were beginning to realize was going to be very similar to what you see here in front of you. We realized that this was going to be something that exceeded the budget, and we weren't going to get a whole lot of bang for the buck, so to speak. So the scheme that that is currently on the table, and I think is in front of all of you as well, proposes a stop, kiss, and go loop at the rear of the building, which is not dissimilar to the condition that we have at some of the other schools in the district. And it would be able to get 28 cars off of the street onto the site where staff has greater control of them, and greater control of the students getting into and out of their cars, and presumably be a safer environment to do so. Because of that, it requires some additional paving, bollards, various other safety measures that were not, I think, anticipated at the time that the budget was made, which I think, I wasn't there at the time, but I presume was based on that initial scheme that the police put together in 2010. So that is the main reason for the budget increase on that line item.
Okay, so you have it listed as white, though. So in essence, are you talking about completely eliminating all of that work in this phase?
Well,
And how would that affect?
right, so the site work is not constrained by FEMA, but obviously is constrained by the overall budget. So the reason it's in white right now is because we're looking at two different things. There's items 15 and 15B. So there was some work at the front of the building, which I think we are all, we being the committee and the various city agencies, the school that we've reviewed it with, are in agreement that it's a fine solution. It provides for the a queue for the 6 buses that spec requires, as well as adding 5 additional parking spaces to the parking lot. The rear of the building, the stop, kiss, and go loop, is a bit more, has received more criticism, let's put it.
So basically, it's more of a want than a need.
Well,
Based purely budgetary, when we're looking and prioritizing.
yeah, so I mean, I think it would depend on who you ask, in terms of the desire for a larger stop, kiss, and go area. But given the current criticism of the scheme, we are evaluating with the PTA, various parent groups.
All right. So you asked, my final comment then is you asked for guidance from board members, and my guidance would be I don't want to spend time on this when we can prioritize other things, and on the building that we can get like HVAC and other things that will, in a mostly walking school district, I don't see the benefit of spending extra money on a kiss and go. And maybe that is to encourage them to walk more. I don't know. It's not my call, but I understand that we have other priorities here. So my gut tells me let's follow what you're saying on this white line and reduce that. Thank you.
Mrs. Maxinelli.
My only question is, I mean, I understand that the blue line is a hard and fast limit, correct?
Correct.
So whatever is in that final column under the conceptual design, so those are essentially actuals, correct?
Correct.
So budgeted versus actual, so this is what it's actually coming down to. I have faith that you're going to do what you can, keeping an HVAC and working in whatever else you prioritize to make sure you don't top at that 2.6. But I guess I'm unclear on if line 15 is an important priority, and I'm not disagreeing with Mr. Asa on whether it's a priority or not. I'm not understanding the math of why aren't we including from the included line, a column, up to the 2.6 max. Why don't we also have room for line 15 since this is in our waterfall for 3.2?
The site work isn't part of FEMA.
Exactly. And we have budgeted for 3.2, and I'm asking why aren't we doing work that represents 3.2?
$3.2 million. So, sorry. So, yeah, so you've touched upon something that's important here. So, so of the items that we're proposing, in order, those in green, in order to get under the FEMA budget, now I'll direct you to line item 26B. So we're at $2,601,000, so we're about $9,000 under the FEMA budget there. Moving down to 29B, there's about $176,000 under the, currently we're about $176,000 under the overall budget of 3.2. That $176,000, I expect we would go to, and can really only go to, site work. It can't go to anything in the building because it would put us over the FEMA cap. So depending on where we shake out with the continued analysis of the stop, kiss, and go configuration, that 176,000 would get would go to some site work.
Okay, that's, hold on a second, that's not making sense to me. If the final column is actual, and the column on the left of that is included, that included column of this project can only max out at 2.6. No matter what, that included column caps at 2.6. That's my understanding of what included, what FEMA max limit means. So if the FEMA max limit is 2.6, that included column, whatever it is that we take off, I'm going to call it a shopping list, and I don't mean to make light of it, has to max at 2.6. Our budget is 3.2. Why can't, again, I'm just assuming that if we can get some of these things under this project, it'll only be more expensive in a subsequent phase.
The things that gap between the FEMA
Yeah.
cap and what was budgeted for,
Right.
that can go for soft costs or site work, because that is what is excluded from FEMA. So even though we have,
So we are electing to do
so
which,
why the building committee is here partly is because when you look at what is included under FEMA, and we have the ed specs, they have to follow the ed specs, something is going to have to give right now based on these numbers within the building. Because everything, for the most part, within the building falls under FEMA. So the items that are in white are the committee's recommendations of things not to address.
and they are going to end, though, with a $3.2 million project. Is that correct?
That Well, that,
Close to it as possible.
Right.
Yeah, as close to it as possible.
Okay, and the point is, this is not a voting item tonight. So
No, no, it's-
essentially,
no,
this
no.
could have been a discussion of, do we support fresh air, air
Well,
conditioning
well,
as the top priority and take it from there? I mean, we're not, all of, I'm not saying that the information is invaluable, but all we needed to do tonight was give them the sense of the body. We're not voting to cut and change ed specs.
we are not voting to cut in ed specs. We're giving them direction, and to some extent, the direction about the stage could affect the renovation of the building. And they're going to come to us, they're going to go back to the Board of Selectmen, and then at some point, they may come back to us for
A change.
a change to the ed specs. And in
Right, but that's, isn't that
in
when we
terms
need
of-
to have that discussion?
No, listen, in terms of prioritizing, you could say, some member of this board can say, I would rather put the money, for argument's sake, not do the AC in the gym. Instead, I'd rather put that money towards the stage renovation. So I think it is important for the board to see what the priorities are, and for everyone to vocalize and give the committee some direction to say, mechanical marines of fresh air, the AC is my #1 priority. I agree with what is in green, or if you don't agree with what is in green, to share that with the committee now, so as they move forward and do their cost estimates and go back to the Board of Finance, when they come back to us, they'll know where they stand with us. I shared as the liaison that I thought the board's priority was the infrastructure of the building. The AC, the electrical, the sprinklers. I didn't want to make that assumption, so the committee is here. Ms. Pitko.
I have a question through the chair to Mr. Cullen. Out of the 11 elementary schools, how many of them have a stop, kiss, and go?
I don't know specifically, but I tend to want to say yes, all of them do.
I mean, forgive me, my kid takes the bus, so I know my school has it, but I haven't seen it in action. And the theory behind this versus what Sherman has right now. Why is a stop, kiss, and go so important in our elementary schools?
Controls traffic, parents where they need to go, get them to queue up as far as possible, stop, let the children out, and keep moving. So,
Okay.
and it does work.
I mean, I agree with Mr. Asa about the stage. I think it's very important that all of our 11 schools are equitable structurally. I mean, if you're looking from some direction from us of what we think is a priority, I think we were focusing more on the numbers for a while here.
Well, because the numbers are really driving the priority in terms of, they have the FEMA cap. So it's, the numbers kind of speak for themselves and are giving us some direction and giving them some direction. They are telling you what the building committee, their priority is. That may require them to exclude things that are in the ed spec, which would have them come back to us. In the essence of time, being that, we'd like to move forward, and if certain things aren't going to be happening, it doesn't pay for the architects to be developing plans that may never come to fruition, delaying the project further. Like, I don't want them to necessarily be doing work that is going to lead nowhere. It's not efficient, it delays things, costs could escalate, which is why I'm hopefully, just having everyone answer their questions, so when we lead them, away from here, they can kind of get to work and go to the Board of Selectmen, really having an idea of where we stand in terms of our priorities. I did speak at the building committee as a liaison, but I wanted to come back to the full board just so they could hear from all of you what your priority is. I didn't want to make an assumption. I think we all agree, we put forth this ed spec, everything in there is important to us. At some point, we want to see it all done. It's just a question of when. Mr. Dwyer and then Ms. Leeper. I think
Mrs. Jacobson had her hand up first.
you had your hand up.
Thank you. I think the one thing that this board can agree on is that we're not going to go over the FEMA cap. I think that's a
We
fair
agree as
statement. Because that would trigger costs that would push this budget well beyond what the town is ready to commit to. As I've looked at this project over the years and gone to PTA meetings, I'll say everybody wants their cake and eat it too. They want the building air conditioned. They want an APR room that makes sense with the other elementary schools. and they want a safe kiss and go, if that's the phrase we're using, because every time I've gone to a PTA meeting, of those three issues, it is the safety of children coming in and out of the building that has been brought up more often than not. And I suspect that if you went to the PTA, and maybe you have, and said, we can't get all three done. That's what I'm understanding from you tonight. We can't get all three done. If I can only afford one, what is it? Because right now, you're saying AC is the most important, if I understand you correctly, and the other two have to wait for another phase. Is that have I read you correctly? The way you've put your numbers out here.
Yes.
I mean, if we were voting tonight on your recommendation, it would be to put the AC in, but not allocate as much money for site work that would accomplish the kiss and go arrangement that people would prefer, and to not spend money on the APR room, stage, and whatnot. You're not making that recommendation tonight, but the budget suggests that.
Yes, just a point of clarification on the stage is we're not proposing adding the stage to the gym, but we are proposing modifying the existing stage, removing the existing stage in the APR to create the enlarged APR and flexibility that doing so would provide.
It's an alternative, maybe a half step toward making it better, but it doesn't get all the way to, let's say, Riverfield, which we pushed out the gym so that we could put a stage in.
Correct.
And so, I'd be hard pressed. I would be curious whether the school community, have they come to your meetings and said, yes, we will accept not doing the site work so that we get the kind of kiss and go area that we think is required? I'm wondering what the reaction in the community is to those three priorities, and we're staying with the AC and not with the other two. And I don't know whether that's a question for the liaison or who.
There has been public comment at the meeting. There has been mixed reactions to the stop, kiss, and go line and the placement of it. And my impression is that if you drive your children to school, you maybe are more in favor of a more efficient way to drop off your children. If you walk your children to school, you are against having the stop, kiss, and go in the back of the school. That there's a loss of play space, it changes the culture. I've gotten many, many emails from parents who are against the current setup.
And I would ask that, I think I've heard comments from the Sherman parents, as many from the walkers who are walking to school, but they don't feel the traffic creates a safe situation for them. So I think, at least my impression, I may be wrong, is that that's not an issue just of the people who drive to school, but of the parents who have walkers who have to walk in that area. And I'm just curious as to, if we made this decision, what the reaction would be for the overall school community.
Do you want me to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah.
We did meet last Friday evening for quite a while, and as we were prioritizing from the staff perspective, including Dr. Banner, who's the current principal, listening to the parents, we felt like this was an issue that we could take out and still be okay. And actually coming from the input from parents, I think going through this process, I don't want to speak for Dr. Banner, but we were in a meeting today about this, and this has really brought to surface how many parents are driving their children that live literally a block or a block and a half away from school. And they feel like that's been a really healthy discussion actually in the community about what can they do to be a more walkable community. We did a lot of work on this issue last year, actually met with the safety team, with the police, and actually Chief Liddy was one of the leaders on that last year. And we were ready to try a drop off in a different pattern using Fern Street, which is what the parents that had been more vocal had been asking for. So what we have told the building committee we're willing to do, and Dr. Banner is working on that right now, taking that plan from last year that was approved by the safety team, working with the police, and being able to flip the way the buses and the cars are dropped off now. We do believe that that adds about another 50 feet of drop-off, so your cars are more maximized. We're looking right now at trying that beginning April 1st, so that they actually can be able to look at April, May, June, which one of those drop-off scenarios would work the best, and it'll also just help inform the community, because that's something we've been looking at for the last, really, 2 years.
So my last comment would be, I think when it does come back to this board, not tonight, I'll ask Dr. Banner if he is speaking on behalf of the entire school community and recommends this is the priority. Because at the end of the day, Dr. Banner will be the front person who has to explain the decision. And so I'll ask him to represent that that's his considered opinion as well, on behalf of the school community.
I might add. And I might just add to that, part of our discussion today was after we have had a period to trial this, and I think that would be the only thing we would probably want to double check with building committee, doing this on April 1st, we were trying to give ourselves 4 weeks of communication, but if we need to be more aggressive, just to let us know, because we could aggressively communicate and perhaps try it sooner, but, and looking at really surveying after we do this to get broad community input from the school community, from teachers as well, because the teachers are also split, especially teachers that have been in the building, if you go back, 15 or 20 years, because it used to actually flow in this pattern, and it was when they went through a construction, I believe, phase 2, that it actually got switched to the way it is now. So we definitely could be more aggressive if we need to, if you just let us know.
Yeah, as the chair of the building committee, I appreciate this effort and applaud it. Not only what you're proposing on swapping the bus drop-off and the stop, kiss, and go area, because I think, number one, it would be very informative to us. But number two, the other thing I wanted to say is that I very much applaud some of the grassroots efforts by various parents in the community to take a hard look at the way the way we behave. I'm a parent, and I do some less than desirable drop-off situations myself from time to time. But I think the one thing I can say is that I think this has spurred a positive effect amongst the parents to really dial in and dial in on this concept that Sherman is a walking school, and put forth various efforts to reduce the number of cars that come to the school, both at drop-off and pickup. So I've been very pleased to see that. So.
Ms. Jacobson, final comment?
Sorry, I actually have a question.
Oh, sure.
I did have a question about the removal of the stage. Is that something that's been widely accepted by the community and staff to move forward on?
To be
Or
honest,
if you want to address that, or whoever.
to be honest, I haven't received much feedback on that item. A lot of the feedback that I've received, both in public comment and directly to me, has been about the site work and the HVAC and
Lockers.
and lockers.
Bring me those lockers, man.
And also,
20 years.
And also the life safety stuff. I think many
Okay.
parents weren't aware that the school didn't
Just
have a
wanted to
sprinkler system.
Make
So-
sure there wasn't any pushback on that idea. No, I'm on board with what everyone else has said.
Do you have any last questions for us, or? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about you. Ms. Sleeper.
After the locker comment, now I'm hesitant. I was just going to ask why 14 and the lockers were in a lighter green, and should we be reading anything into that? And then I was wondering about the removal cost versus the replacement cost, because I think there might be a removal concern with the lockers at Sherman. So I was wondering if that's the bulk of the cost, is removing them, or?
To the bulk question, I don't think the bulk would be in the removal. I think it would be in the replacement. The fact that it was in a lighter green was more of a reminder to myself than anything else to get a better idea of where that fell on the priority list. Again, being one of the big ticket line items on there that I wasn't positive at first as to whether or not we'd still be able to do that and get it under the $2.6 million FEMA cap. As it currently stands, it looks like we are. So my intention right now is that it would continue to be included in this phase 3.
So, HVAC, AC, electrical.
Got it. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Ms. Jacobson, our legislative update.
Wow, I'm up already.
You are up.
Okay. Let me just get ready for this. Okay, I emailed everyone a pretty comprehensive legislative update the other day. I've been watching carefully on, a regular basis, things in Hartford that potentially have impact upon our district and our schools. As everyone knows, the governor proposed his biennium budget on February 20th, so I provided the board with not only a link to the full budget, but updates on key budget amounts pertaining to Fairfield and in general ECS and excess cost, open choice. I don't know how in-depth you want me to get into all of this, but there are definitely impacts, should this move forward in some of these areas upon Fairfield, as well as a number of bills either in the Education Committee or in other committees actually that are addressing issues pertaining to public schools, including those of Fairfield. I don't know if anyone has any questions on what I sent out to you or any concerns or anything that I can help clarify at this point, but there's a lot going on in terms of possible changes in Hartford in terms of teacher retirement contributions, changing, looking at commission being formed to look at redistricting, school consolidations, budget implications in terms of reduced possible school construction reimbursements. So there's just a lot going on right now in terms of just the regular everyday bills pertaining to education that I've provided you with. So I don't want to spend too much time going into great detail right now, but if I'm happy to answer any questions, presuming that everyone had a chance to look this over and understanding of what's happening right now.
Ms. Pickup?
I was just wondering if anyone living in Fairfield had a question, what was the best thing for them to do? Who should they contact about this outside of our state reps? Who would really know? I had a lot of text messages and stuff asking if we were going to regionalize. So I realized that people have questions. They just may not know where to go to find the answers. So since you are always on top of this and I love reading your emails, I figured maybe you could point them in a good direction.
Well, specific questions, definitely. I mean, the person, our state representative that sits on the Education Committee is actually Laura Devlin. So she's the person that sits on education. Of course, you could always reach out to any of our state delegation. I think that for answers, the best way to understand what's happening is to actually read the legislation. There's going to be a very large public hearing on all of that this Friday, so if anyone has any comments on that, I would urge them to submit testimony should they want to. That's pretty much, or ask our superintendent or anyone that, that is obviously also paying great attention to all of these things going on right now. Yeah.
Anything, Dr. Jones, you want to add just in terms of legislative update that wasn't covered in Ms. Jacobson's text?
No, I mean, we're just watching what happens right now, and I think right now there's so many unknowns, and it's difficult to get answers to questions. Even things like you mentioned the open choice funding. It's been reduced in the proposed budget, but is that because it was underspent at the state level, or does that mean they're reducing the $3,000 per student? And those are the kinds of questions we just don't know yet. But we get updates from CABE, from CAPS. Everybody's being very active this year again on the budget.
I just want to finalize and say that given the proposal for the Commission on Shared Services to commence, I just want to bring it to the board's attention that under that proposal, should it pass with the existing language as it is that pertains to all districts, that we would be responsible for submitting 2 reports, one in September and one in January. As well, would the town side be responsible for a number of reports? So that would be work, and I don't know if Tony wants to speak to that in terms of us being prepared to have any dialogue about what may need to go into those reports by September and January.
We don't need to go too far into it tonight.
No.
Yeah,
Just going forward.
I put you on the agenda for tonight just because there was the hearing on Friday, just so you could be up to speed on what's coming up, and if anybody had any questions, or if at some point moving forward you think that we should be making submitting testimony as a board, I would ask you to please bring that up, something that we can discuss and add to a future agenda. Ms. Maxicano?
The only thing I'd add, just to Ms. Picco's point about who to contact, there was also just that, I only know this from reading the article, but in terms of contacting Mr. Tetro, First Selectman Tetro, because they just had that Fairfield County meeting of all of the First Selectmen's, and I think there was also some Board of Ed people or Board of Finance people from other towns that were part of that. But the important part about that, I think from our perspective, is it means someone's been in the room with Governor Lamont on this, and therefore, to me, that means there's an open line of communication there, so that concerns could not only be shared with us, but also with Mr. Tetro's office, and to have that conversation there of how can you advocate further if something looks like it's impacting Fairfield or there are other questions. So just the more they keep hearing from us, I think it helps.
And I think for parents also, we got something today from Connecticut PTA. They're going to be, they have a legislative branch. They advocate also that if any PTAs or parents want to submit testimony or advocate, I would suggest just going through PTA as well.
Yeah. And if you have anything that's up for Friday that you want to submit testimony on, I would get that in by 3:30 tomorrow, if possible. And if anyone can email me if they want to know how easily that is to do that. I'll be doing my own, of course, but I would suggest by 3:30 tomorrow, so that the committee actually has your testimony at the time of the meeting on Friday.
Thank you. Okay. Moving right along to what our meeting should have been about from the start, when we started these special meetings for February, our discussion on facilities. So to preface this discussion, this was supposed to be a working meeting. We were supposed to get around a table and really just have a free flow of ideas. It is a difficult topic. It is a very emotional topic for some when you talk about moving children or changing the way that we deliver services, or creating new services, or reutilizing buildings in a different way. So I would like to just put it out there that there might be some ideas that are said tonight in the spirit of creativity. Don't freak out. Just don't take a comment that was said and think that it's going to happen. Don't run with it. We want to just try to talk things through and do it in as transparent a way as possible. So to that effort, let's get started. At our last regular meeting, we started this discussion about our board goal, and Ms. Jacobson brought up a very good point about what are we trying to solve? What problem are we trying to solve? And we all might have a different feeling on what facilities issue is most important to us or most concerning to us. Our board goal talks about utilization rates, it talks about redistricting, it talks about a solution for ECC overcrowding. We did address the ECC possibly for the short term. It talked about Walter Fitzgerald. But there are other things going on within the district that might be of a concern to you. And this is an opportunity to to vocalize that, and as we're talking about facilities in the long term, to put it out there as something that we should be keeping an eye on. So does anybody want to get the ball rolling in terms of what is of concern? What problem are you trying to solve, or do you think that we should be trying to solve looking into the future? Mr. Peterson.
Well, I'll start with a general comment, because I've been thinking a lot about this from a conceptual basis and talking to members of the public and what their views on what the issues in our district are. I think we have, maybe I'm speaking a little ahead of myself, but I believe on this board we have kind of a broader, holistic idea of what the district is about in terms of, I think there's a sense that like we have schools that are overutilized and underutilized. We have crowded and less crowded schools, and how should we deal with those seats, when I think that a lot of the conversations we have at this table are less about capacity and more about programming. We have, you know, we're not thinking about why North Stratfield is at 75%. We're thinking about where can we fit everyone, including ECC, including Walter Fitzgerald. And I think that there's a little bit of a conceptual gap in my experience between what the public is seeing and what we're talking about doing. And that's something that I've found difficult to bridge. But again, just kind of starting with that comment, I think that we view things fundamentally differently than a lot of other people in town do, just because we have that, all of these issues linked together. All of them linked together. And that's just a random place to start.
I want specific. Ms. Pitko.
Thanks, Jess. Been thinking about this a lot, and it would be no surprise that one of my priorities is to keep the ECC in one central model. It's funny because this is my 4th year on the board, and I remember coming on here 4 years ago with most of these issues not existing. It just seems like this job got more complicated as we went on, and there was more issues in this district. And I remember my first week on telling Mr. Dwyer, I never want to redistrict, and yet we were talking about it 4 years ago. And here I'm like, I can't believe this almost has to happen. It's unbelievable because there are so many issues to fix with even now looking at like possibly not getting funding for our school improvement projects, remodeling schools. It was never on my scope of understanding that that could happen. But if you were asking me what is my immediate concern, the ECC is one of them. I would like to see a long-term solution as soon as possible for them, because I know how effective it is for those students. And 1 year for those students is huge.
I knew that was going to be your answer, which is why I added the ECC, as an agenda item in and of itself. But thank you for vocalizing it, so the rest of the agenda made sense. Anybody else? Mr. Peterson.
I'll get the ball rolling with kind of a specific thought at this point, if that's all right. About the ECC, I've heard the public comment on it. I feel the intensity of the feeling there. What I have difficulty with is the notion that we have a facility that we built kind of for an 84 capacity program. It looks like we're projecting that it's going to be 165 kids in the whole ECC program by June. I don't really see a reason why we can't have 2 half-size programs, because if we're talking about a situation where we're saying 84 is a good critical mass, where we can deliver great services, build a community, we now have enough students for 2 of those. I'm not seeing why breaking it up is necessarily a terrible thing, because again, if you look a couple of years ago, when people were loving the program, we could just have 2 of those. We're not really kind of having the quality of the program. And that's a conceptual thing that I've been wrestling with.
Okay, and we will get further along on that. So we've got 1, wrestling with 2. Mr. Asa.
Okay, so let me try to bring us back to D here really quick. identification of specific facility concerns to be addressed and resolved. So to be addressed and resolved with regards to Sherman, that is one school that I'm very interested in the fact that we are over 100% capacity in our current and projected, okay? Now, that being said, I haven't seen a lot of outpouring from the Sherman community saying they have a problem with it. But at the same time, when we did Holland Hills renovation and addition, I thought part of the reason was to alleviate some of the overcrowding and spread the students throughout the district so people would be in a school that was at 80 to 90% capacity. So I guess I would like to have kind of an idea, because Mill Hill is a project that was also 504 to address the number of students that we have. And now looking at the enrollment numbers and what the other town bodies are telling us, a 504 school is probably not likely unless we're drastically changing the way we use our buildings. So I think we need to really look at Sherman if we're going to plan on doing something there. And I know I don't want to get to the redistricting thing yet, because that's obviously a part of that discussion, but I think we need to look at that building. I mean, we're investing in that building, and are we investing in that building to continue using it at over 100% capacity? Or are we going to invest in that building to use it at the capacity that was what I thought the intent of all of these projects? So I think it's important for us to continue that dialogue. And if we were looking at enrollment numbers in the beach area, dwindling and dying down, and coming down 10-20% at that school in 5-10 years, then I think as some other board members may be able to elaborate on, we've gone through these cycles before. So I think Sherman is a concern. I think we also need to look at Dwight. Dwight is a school that has a lot of needs, maintenance-wise, renovation-wise. It is on our waterfall. So I think it's very important to look, because those numbers at Dwight are lower. So I think it's very important for us to look at that as we move forward and what we're going to do with that school. And I'm never going to advocate closing a school and losing it, per se. I won't do that, because I think that's foolish, and I think we've done that in the past years and generations prior, and look at where we're at now. So, but that doesn't mean I'm opposed to doing other things with a school, and whether that means incorporating an ECC program or utilizing a school. If this board, and we're going to get to this next, but if this board is telling us that we need a one location ECC, the only way I can see that happening is taking one of the smaller schools and utilizing it as an ECC, which will mean shifting students out of that school to other schools and redistricting, and likely with a move of that mass would be looking at town-wide. So I think it's important for us to look at that, and when we do get to the ECC discussion, I think first and foremost is decided whether this board really wants a one or is open to a two location, because I think that's going to drive a lot of our facilities talks. And then the other schools that are in the thing. I mean, we've talked about HVAC, right? We've established HVAC. Do I think that this town is ever going to bond a district-wide HVAC program? No. Do I want to wish for it? Yes. Do I think we should explore it like we're planning to see what it's going to take in the different schools? I do support that program that we put in our budget. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think that's another important thing when it comes to specific facility concerns. That is a concern for me because I didn't look at HVAC as a life and safety and security issue until recently. And it came up at our meetings here and in the Finance Committee. And I really never thought of the fact, I said, you know, I grew up in a school with no air conditioning. We had doors and windows wide open every day. You can't do that now. So times have changed. We are in a sealed envelope environment. So yeah, when you have high humidity, high heat, low air quality, you are opening the door for what I do now consider a safety and security risk to the children. And the only way to address that is to get them fresh air and mechanical means of fresh air and proper HVAC. I do think that's going to take a long time, but I really think we need to focus on that, and we need to look at our waterfall chart, and we need to look at our schools, and do we prioritize that and start to think about reworking our waterfall chart? Because when it was originally done, it was a great document. But I think we may need to revisit some of that and some of what we're looking at to do, and seeing if we need to kind of, when we get these numbers back of what we think it would be for each school, if that falls through and it goes through in the budget after reductions are made, potentially, we'll have to see what happens. But those to start are my first primary list.
Okay. Mrs. Maxinelli?
3 other issues. As obviously, I know these are things that we'll be talking about, but just to have as perhaps part of our conversation. First of all, I don't know if it's possible, and first of all, I don't know exactly what the strategic plan committee of the town is working on. What's going to be the nature ultimately of the report that they produce? What's the timeline of that? I'll admit I haven't paid enough attention beyond doing the survey to know about that timeline. But I'm wondering if they might not have input or be coming out with things or producing ideas or plans that impacts this discussion. I think we need to know that. I mean, it'd be short-sighted to not hear from them. Similarly, I don't know if we need to reach out to TP&Z or town staff with Jim Wen about, can you just tell us vision-wise, what is the direction of this town in terms of housing, and helping us to direct our conversation. So we're not just looking, yes, we have the Malone and McBroom numbers, but just conceptually to have that sense. And then third, I think we would be remiss and would pay a price if we don't have as part of this discussion what we had been requested by other town bodies a year ago, which is that talk of structural efficiencies. And that barring an educational difference, if we're looking at 2 programs that we would feel we could sign off that we are educationally well serving our children by 2 options, we must look at the finances of those 2 options. We've got some things happening in the state that, I mean, I'm not a doom and gloom person, but these things are happening, and some will visit at a different time frame, but I think we have to assume that they are. And more to the point, the other town bodies, to earn their trust, we need to continue to have that. We had tried to have the ad hoc committee. That didn't work. I still think they produced some good ideas and had good conversation. So now it's left to the 9 of us. We disbanded the committee. Now we need to pick up that conversation, and it must color and flavor the work that we do. So obviously as we come up with ideas, whether it's here and we're letting, if we know ahead of time that we have an idea, it behooves us to let Dr. Jones know that, so she can, if it involves getting financial numbers on, 2 ideas of plans. But I do think this needs to be a factor in our conversation. We owe it to the town, we owe it to the citizens, because it's going to be expected of us whether we do it explicitly or not.
Ms. Leeper?
I want to echo what Mr. Peterson and Mr. Isa said, that I think the ECC decision sort of sets up every decision we have thereafter. And I agree that if the ECC was originally developed to meet the needs of 85 children, and we're now serving nearly double that, were we not doing it efficiently and effectively when we only had the 85? And if we know that our population of children needing the services at the ECC is only growing every single year, in 10 years we might not have the choice to only have one. And so I think we really need to be thinking of this long-term decision for our ECC for the next 10, 15, 20 years, as this is only going to be a program, all data is showing us, that's going to grow, and it's growing rather rapidly. So I just want to add that little nuance. And then also about the AC proposal, I want to echo Mr. Issa that it is a health and safety and security risk. And not only because our windows are closed and that's affecting the air quality that our children are and our staff are in all day, but also that our climate is getting warmer and wetter. And so we might only be seeing more and more costs of mold abatement in our old facilities as our schools are sealed up so tight, which they weren't built for. So I think that's something to factor in when we're thinking about how expensive air conditioning is. Also, what expense are we looking at in the long term of mold abatement? And also, this is a big idea and perhaps something we haven't done before, I'm not sure. But I like the idea of, after we get all the data about doing our AC in all of our schools and getting what is likely to be a large number and putting it out to the town for a referendum, and the town telling us, is this something that you think you're willing to fund? And if the answer is no, then the answer is no, and we continue on our way with the waterfall. But if the answer is yes, then let's explore what that would mean in terms of cost per year per resident in Fairfield. And then also, how does that offset the expenditure that we've already outlaid in our waterfall? Because if we did that work for our schools, that could be roofs and ceilings and HVAC and ductwork and lots of other things that would not need to then be done 10 years from now when it's only going to be more expensive. So I just, not quite so pessimistic on the idea that maybe this is feasible, and I think it's at least something to continue the conversation on.
Ms. Pitko.
So the hamster's turning in my head as I listen to everybody give their ideas, and I start to think about efficiencies and equitability of our students. And I think, well, what about a long-term solution for the Walter Fitzgerald campus? Talk about equity for our students and doing something financially sound for them. And then I start to think about all the different needs of our students in this district and moving forward with the math academy. You know, what if that potentially grows? You look at the ECC, and yes, those numbers are only going to go up with those children, right? You're talking about students who receive services. The reason why the one model worked so well, even though they were growing, is because, as an educator, I understand this, they were collaborating, and that collaboration is worth more money than you can possibly imagine. As every student who came in who had different needs, they were working together. Sorry.
We'll get there. No. Anybody else? Ms. Jacobson, anything?
No, my focus is very similar to everyone.
You know, I put this on there for you.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh.
What problem? It was your idea.
Well, yeah, because I wanted everyone to be able to have the conversation about what goals they're trying to reach and see where there was consensus or not. I fundamentally agree that, which we're going to talk about later, is having conversation about ECC. Walter Fitzgerald, I echo as well. I'm curious to know where we are with that lease, if we have it or not at this point for the long term, because I think if we don't have that work done, that's going to drive some other decisions, to be quite frank. AC on our buildings, totally agree that that's an issue of health, safety, and just maintenance of our buildings at this point that we need to look at a necessity. And that's, you know, those are my big ones.
Mr. Dwyer?
Yeah. I have, all of the, you know, we all want to do everything. We can't. I am more aligned with Mr. Peterson's comment that unless this board is willing to close an elementary school so that we can convert it to an ECC, I don't believe this community or this board is going to say, let's create a 12th elementary size school, you know, find a piece of land and do it, or find a piece of property that we can convert to it. I just don't see that as in the cards. So we have to either co-locate in a building that can be a ECC and something else, which I think is difficult when you think of the ECC being the population that it is, who could co-locate with them and still be a compatible common use of a building. So for me, in terms of priority, I would still say that the quickest decision this board has to make, so that our chair and our superintendent is prepared in May to go to the State Board of Education, is whether this board will or will not redistrict. Yes, we're redistricting to resolve our facility utilization issues, but along the way, there are other issues that we can resolve. One might be how to make space for a math academy. Another might be to how to address McKinley. So I think this board, from just a pure decision-making point of view, has to really focus on, are we ready to incur the emails and the phone calls and the community conversation around redistricting? Because I think all of us at different campaign periods have been asked, will you redistrict? And we've probably all said, oh, we don't want to touch that. I know I did back in 2011, but I agree with Ms. Pitko. Times are changing, and so therefore maybe we do have to address that for a variety of reasons. I would include in that, I would hope the board would address the redistricting issues around the two high schools. I believe that that is a question that got avoided the last time we redistricted. And I think a decade from now, if we don't address that, it'll be more difficult to address it a decade from now. So if we're going, once we agree to redistricting, I think we have to look at
The feeder pattern,
the feeder pattern.
the address feeder pattern for the high school.
That leads to the high school. For me, the second most important decision that we have to make is the ECC. We have to make a commitment to say, are we trying to, is what driving us getting one facility? Because if that's what's driving us, then you make that decision and other things fall off of that. But if we're willing to go with two, and we don't have an AED here, so I won't say that, and if we're willing to go with three, because I wouldn't want Ms. Pitko to. But are we willing to look at more than a one-facility ECC? And I think that's the second most important decision that we have to make. I agree with Mr. Asa that it's going to be a difficult sell to convince the community that 504 is needed. Our consultants tell us the reason it's needed is because we are in favor of a neighborhood schools approach to our elementary schools. You have all the guidelines that have been agreed to over the last decade, and as long as those guidelines stay in place, we need more capacity on the west side of town. If we're willing to adjust those guidelines, then 441 would work fine. And I would go so far as to say if right now the capacity of Mill Hill, including the portables, is well above the 378 minimal that the Finance Committee would like the Building Committee to look at. And I would ask the board to say, if we end up with a 378 school, is that where we want to put our capital dollars and avoid or ignore all of the other capital needs that may exist out there? And do we say, no, if we're not going to get any capacity and actually we're going to shrink the capacity of Mill Hill because we're eliminating portables, then perhaps we should look at other uses for those capital dollars to address more issues that benefit the entire community. Walter Fitzgerald is fourth in my list in terms of priorities. We ought to address it, but at the moment, it's probably okay for a year or two. What is it? 15 years between the time the board started talking about in 2010 that we ought to have a program to eliminate portables, or trailers, as some people call them. And until we eliminate the ones at Mill Hill, it's probably going to be 15 years. I see nothing wrong with putting forth a 15-year proposal to add AC to every school and just advocate to the town that this is as important as the multi-year effort to eliminate portables. It's as important as the multi-year effort to increase security around the schools, and we ought to employ a multi-year effort on AC and just get about the task of advocating, which is our role. So for me, those are the most important priorities. And I understand that structural change is a nice phrase, but at the end of the day, you have to say, well, what kind of change are you willing to accept? And because we do have to put a teacher in every classroom, it's not like you can create efficiencies, because the only way you can create efficiencies is to say, we're going to have larger class sizes. We're going to have larger class sizes to eliminate teaching positions in classrooms. But last time I looked at it and said, okay, let's add one to or maybe 2 kids. Instead of 19 on average, we're at 21. You save, 15, 18 teachers out of 1,000 certified staff. You do that kind of a, quote, dramatic change, add 2 on average, and you're saving 10, 15 positions, 18 out of 1,000. That's not structural change, even something as dramatic as that. There's a certain amount of cost of operating a school district, which is 1 teacher for every classroom. There's no structural change that's going to avoid that basic cost. And so I appreciate that we want to talk about structural change, but I think there are best practices of operating a public school that still have to be addressed. Thank you.
Sorry.
Ms. Jacobson?
I just had one more point that I forgot to mention. Somewhat similar to Mrs. Maxon Kennelly's is moving forward as we have discussions on facility utilization, program placement, and whatnot, that we spend a significant amount of time with our consultants and with the town side, understanding where the town is building their capacity in our town. And looking forward, usually the consultants take a look back and to do their enrollment projections, but at this point I think it's necessary, given the developments in the town that are occurring, that we have them press further on current permitting and what is being built exactly where.
Mr. Peterson?
Just a couple of points. I want to echo a lot of what Mr. Dwyer said, because I think that the one-sentence summary of what you were trying to say is it's time for bold change, or we need to at least be prepared to discuss bold change. And the one thing that you said was interesting about saying we don't really want to redistrict. I've been saying from the beginning, before I got into this process, I think that the town needs a comprehensive top-down redistricting. I think we've needed it for a very long time. And I'm at this point not going to shy away from that. So if people want to email me about that, you can start now. Because I think that a lot of what we say here is going to make people nervous and unhappy and uncertain and unsettled, and we need to bear that because we're past the point of half measures.
I want to look at Sherman. I'm going to add mine. I want to look at, sitting on this committee and looking at the costs associated, some of them in large part because there are just a lot of children in a school that is embedded in a neighborhood that probably, arguably, shouldn't have as many children as are there now. So I can't even imagine adding more. I'm not sure the infrastructure can handle it. I know in the past there were more, there were also portables. So I think that we need to kind of keep that in mind moving forward, that what things looked like in the past, if we're committed to not having kids in portables, that option may not be there in the future. I think that, you know, a lot of the things that we talked about that have come up with in terms of the climate, I don't know if you saw it this week, there was a map of a Category 3 hurricane hits the beach area in 2029. You know, a good portion south of the Post Road would be hit. Sherman is in that area. And I don't mean to scare, and I mean, I think everybody down there knows that. But moving forward in terms of wise dollars, I think we need to be cognizant that, well, we'll just add on to Sherman, we'll just add on to Sherman, we'll just add on to Sherman, may not necessarily be the most cost-effective option, given the fact that we have space in other buildings, given the fact that there's a lot of need in other buildings for HVAC, specialized programming, and given the fact that I'm not sure that the neighborhood can really handle it. I mean, how much are we talking about to add a stop, kiss, and go line? It's a walking school, except we're hearing that really it's a driving school. I hope that this discussion changes that. I hope that more kids do walk, but you know, these numbers were somewhat staggering. We're moving a stage to make room because there's not enough room in the cafeteria. There's not enough room in the gym to have a concert. Well, maybe there's just too many children there, and moving forward, maybe we shouldn't be encouraging adding even more. I know that I'm probably going to be on the Sherman Sharks right now. My email is probably going to be flooded, but you know, Sherman is the Sherman population, and it's getting half of what should have been Oldfield. That school's just seeing, you know, it's getting half of a school that really doesn't belong there. And there I go again, you know, that now the old Oldfield neighborhood is saying that they're going to move us, but just kind of telling it like it is, and I think that everybody kind of knows these discussions have been happening, and it needs to be said, because as we're talking about Mill Hill and what size Mill Hill should be, and if you want to keep some semblance of a neighborhood school, where are those kids from Sherman going to go? Are they going to go to Riverfield? Well, Riverfield, you know, is pushing above 85 utilization, above 90%. Are they going to go to Mill Hill? Well, there won't be room in Mill Hill. They could go to Holland Hill, but that changes the feeder pattern. You know, where are they going to go? I don't want to put them back in portables. I don't want them in crowded classrooms. I don't want art on a cart in that school. I don't want music in a cart in that school. And we're talking, you know, years away from now, but I think that we need to really, you know, face it head on that that school is growing, and listening to some of the conversations, to Ms. Jacobson's point about, and Ms. Maxine Kennelly's, the Strategic Planning Committee and the Transit Oriented Development Committee, a lot of the development is around town. So I think that we need to look at the infrastructure of our schools that are around town and what that development is going to do to them and the effect that it's going to have. So that's going to be my little thing that I'm going to keep on bringing up in terms of the utilization at Sherman, and as we move students up or west or possibly east, how that affects everybody else. Mrs. Maxine Kennelly.
One very minor space utilization point, but just through the chair to Dr. Jones. I assume that if there's some dream program or anything, I mean, obviously we've been building up our CLCs, now we're growing our CLCS. If there's anything else in the realm of servicing our special needs population, especially those who are outplaced, you know, I would hope that that would come into this conversation as well in terms of as a space use. I'm not asking for it right now, but I just hope that that would be something that you'll, you know, let us know. Mr. Mancusi will let us know that that needs to factor into our conversation.
Ms. Jacobson.
Just following up on that, I don't know if you or Mr. Mancusi have been able to inquire as to any further information about the incentivized regionalization of special ed services and special ed children. So as we talk about special education programming, what that may look like going forward, being not necessarily in town.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything that's being discussed right now is so out there. We don't really have any idea. And I think more than anything, I don't know if you want to add, Mr. Mancusi, but it's the funding formula that we're most concerned about. And really, we're watching that from a state level because it's really been all over the place. That, to me, is the most concerning.
So you haven't heard in any more detail on these centers for excellence?
No, but the way we look at it, it really, CES is that for us. You know, it really is a regionalized opportunity for our students, and we have students that already access that.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Mr. Dwyer?
Two process comments or questions. I thought I saw an email that suggested that one of the materials in this facility's notebook needs to be updated. Am I forgetting or misreading?
The waterfall.
The waterfall.
The waterfall, just.
And so, depending on each year as a principal uses a building and has one section more or one section less, and a consultant comes in and says, how is the building being utilized? Each report suggests that we have a different number of large classrooms or small spaces. And suddenly we say, well, I thought we had 20. No, I thought we had 18. And so I'm curious as to whether we as a board should commit to say the information that is in this book is the information that we will use to guide our decision-making. Because if halfway through a debate somebody comes forth with, yeah, but what about this report? I think we ought to at least say that this is the base from which we will be making decisions. And so I'm curious if there's any additional factual information that board members think they need or the superintendent wants to update so that we have a common set of facts from which we're working. And then the second is only this. At some point, I do think that our board has to make a decision. What is the most immediate and important decision we have to make? And let's give Ms. Pitko the decision and say it's ECC. That's the most important thing we have to address. So let's settle that issue. And then once we settle that issue, where do the others fall out? You know, it's that kind of decision-making tree that says, if this, yes, if not, then you move over to another line of the tree. And so I think once we make a decision as to whether it's redistricting or whether it's ECC or whether it's Walter Fitzgerald or it's Mill Hill, whatever it is, start at that point, make some clear decisions as to what to do, and then let the other priorities come as they may.
Ms. Jacobson?
We can't necessarily, just to piggyback on your comment, use what information that's in this book because these enrollment projections and utilizations were built prior to some changes that we've already made, meaning preschool was at Burr, wasn't at Stratfield, so their capacities are not accurate in this book at this time. So I would assume that before we had any real conversations, we would have an update enrollment projection and utilization based on going forward how the buildings are being used, not how they were being used at the time that this was created.
Yeah, and that's my purpose for the question, is to
Okay,
say, let's,
yeah.
whatever it is, let's agree, get it in
Right.
the book and say that's the base of information.
Yeah, I can address that. Behind tab 7 is updated and it is current, but it is based on, which I truly believe is the best way to plan, and that'll be, as Mr. Dwyer said, a decision the board has to make, is looking at not just a building was built for 504, because if it has specialized programming in there, you cannot put that many classrooms for general education, and I think you have to back that out. So if you look at the school building capacity chart for 1920, and you go down to Stratfield, you'll see it's 420. And that's because you've taken an entire section out of rotation for preschool. So this is updated. Whether or not you want to stay with that, you know, you're going to look at utilization in this way. You could obviously move programs. But when you move programs, then that would be part of the larger discussion. CLC programs are obviously much more difficult to move. They're in feeder patterns and, in specific buildings, but this does take that into effect.
Can I just ask a very simple question on this particular chart? I noticed this and wondered about it. Just with Riverfield and the site acreage, is that number current? That feels like, thinking about, comparing it to the Dwight site.
Yeah.
It feels like that was probably the site before all the houses were built in front of it.
That's the 30 acres, Mr. Collin. Is that current or before the houses? I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
This is a random
Yeah.
point.
I don't think we own...
It's current.
I think the school district didn't own that site that all the houses are on.
I wasn't sure about that. I mean, I remember it as a large lawn. So if that's the case, that's fine.
Unless somebody else on the board has a different memory, but I don't
No, if that's
recall
current,
that the
that's fine.
town
I
said,
just-
let's sell this property to a developer.
Mr. Collin has a very strong head shake. Do you want to come to the microphone?
Yes, it's always been 30 acres at Riverfield. That's owned by the town for the school system.
That's fine. It's just that my memory of it as a child, I didn't know what was the town, whether it had been subdivided at some point or what. So I appreciate the context.
So, sorry.
Christine?
Ms. Jacobson?
So, to answer my question, we will be getting an updated, in the 10-year enrollment projections that we normally have from Malone and McBroom when we...
Yeah, you don't do those every year. We only do the annual update, in October 1 count. But when we bring, at whatever point the board decides to bring Malone and McBroom back and do the real work.
Yeah.
I know in our finance meeting, we talked about that a little bit. Did you want to address we talked about looking at the data we have from 2016 is still very good. I mean, it's not that old. It's not like our neighborhoods have radically changed. So when we get ready to bring Malone and McBroom back, it really needs to be at a point you're ready to spend that, $30,000, $40,000 again.
Okay, and then the other thing is, on that chart that you were just referencing, is it possible that we could get a by-school programming piece? So Burr's capacity is 470. Can we just get by school what programs are located at what schools currently and separate it out? Sure. Thank you.
If I recall, we have a set of floor plans that show here are the classrooms that are used for K 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's what's being used for office, what's being used for special ed, and I think that gives a pretty good description of how each school is being used. And I don't know whether Dr. Jones, the last time she updated those, because each year principals are creative and they use the building as needed. So do we have a set of those that we consider to be current as of this past September?
I can't remember if I did them this fall or not. We don't traditionally do them, but I've been doing them to keep up with this, and so I either have last spring or the beginning of this fall, but I'm not sure. But they're easy to do.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I think for tonight, if you look at under Section 6, page 25, there's a facilities page that breaks out every school and how many full-size classrooms, and if there's a CLC there, and the pre-K.
Well, right, so there's, let's just take PER for an example. There's 28 classrooms, 22 are being used for K-5. I know there's a CLC, and I know there's a pre-K. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's still space missing. So, in terms of knowing what that
Yeah, this is not updated. This was, the
Right.
footer is from last year. So like CLCS at Riverfield doesn't show
Right,
up.
exactly.
Pre-Ks, right.
Just
But the full-size classroom
Yes.
column is correct.
Yeah.
So in terms of just having an idea of how many full-size classrooms are in a school, that would be a reference.
Are you
point for
asking
tonight.
more specifically, like, where speech and language happening, physical therapy?
No, I just want to know what special programming is at a school. If there's 2 CLCs, if there's 1 CLC, is there a pre-K, is there, the number. And like, instead of looking at 470, I want to know why it's a 470. You know what I'm saying? Or if it's a 420. I mean, most of it is easy enough to figure out, but I just think it would be helpful to have it on a piece of paper, that's all. For me, anyway, sorry.
Mrs. Maxinelli.
I agree with Mrs. Jacobson's point. I think that it'd be good to know what is the difference between the building capacity and the program capacity, but I'm realizing now that with the Mill Hill number at 273, I don't understand that. It's, and because just to double check myself, I'm in tab 8, looking at the Mill Hill floor plan, which has 18 designated classrooms. That's a 378. We had this discussion before. I do not understand falling back to 273 again. This board already went through this.
I think that's part of the discussion, is that if you want it, if you're not going to have the portables, at least I'm still on the page that Ms. Vitelli pointed us to, that's without portables at 273. So there are no portables. So if you want to count every big classroom, you can do that, but then you're not going to have space for reading and special needs. And so that is the realistic number based on how that building is used. And if we want to use a bigger number, we can certainly update the chart. That'll be whatever the board wants to do with this information. I've tried to give you actual usage of the building, like what's available.
Somebody please correct me if I'm wrong. We had this debate. And I definitely agree. That's where it's a mix, because obviously there's multiple pieces of information here, and so that's what you're discussing is, I think, vitally important. That I don't know if that needs to be, superscribe, what's the number? Superscript number 6, which is yes, but this means no room for speech and language, ELL, art. No, because there's also a designated art. There's a designated art and music classroom and 18 brick and mortar classrooms. That's not including the portables. So I'm to understand that some of these 18 full-size classrooms are broken down, but what we have on 2 pages contradicts the floor plan, and we had this debate before.
We had it in the ed specs, and I believe the ed spec actually has both at the bottom. And so I've tried to put in here, if you want to move kids around this district, the board needs to understand that's how many seats you have if you do not expand that building. You should not be putting more children in that building than that number. If you're getting rid of the portables and you're not going to expand it, that's the realistic number. So, based on how they're utilizing, they have to have those full-size classrooms for their math specialists, for their reading specialists. They just, it doesn't have a lot of space. It doesn't have those small spaces that when we renovate, we're able to add for the buildings.
Right, but I guess conversely, what I'd say, if we're going back to 273, then that sounds like an expansion to 378 sounds sizable, which we all recognize we're taking out portables. This is significant, but I thought that my recollection of the story we're telling is those portables, if you factor in those classrooms, then this has 23 classrooms. I guess I'm trying, as I said, I'm trying to go back to a much older conversation, but I definitely hear what you're saying, the whole idea of 273 because we must have room for these other things. On the other hand, I don't want us presenting the picture of an expansion to 378 or even 441 would be expansive. It's not. So
to go to 378 it is expansive. You have to construct. We can't have 378 children in that building without construction, even though we've said for years that building holds 378 children. So we have to add classrooms, and you're going to have to expand the building. And I think it's actually the opposite, in that we have people in the community who think that building holds 378 children, so that means it will cost us nothing for construction other than just the upgrades. But that's not the reality. It will not hold. If you say we're not going to expand and we're not going to not just do renovation but the expansion piece, that building no longer holds 378 children. You actually do need to move children now out of Mill Hill.
Then I guess to me then the floor plan is inaccurate.
No, it's how the rooms are used. You just don't understand. But I think what
I don't know. Hold on. I do understand. It's just, it's 2 different stories we're telling, and we already had this telling. If we want to change our telling of the story,
I
Okay,
totally
but-
agree with that, and I think that's been part of the challenge of utilization versus capacity. Capacity for the fire marshal says, how many children can we cram in a building? Utilization says, how are we using the building for the best instructional way for a K-5 building? And that's what I've tried to give you here. Certainly, we can change this. We'll do whatever, the board wants to do. I'm just trying to be realistic about when you start talking about moving children around the district, that becomes a really important number, because we've kind of messaged that that building can meet the capacity that it really can't if we get rid of all those trailers.
Okay, thank you.
All right. For our purposes for Mill Hill, I think for this board, we know that 273 is taking into consideration their specialized programming that is in a full-size classroom. When a renovation is done and there's specialized space that is built to house those programs, those full-size classrooms that are now being used for speech or language arts can be reclaimed for general education. Just that, and I understand that it's, with other town bodies, they may not understand the
But
nuance.
here's what I think would make that very clear, is that the next time there's a discussion before the other town bodies, I think to make this very visual, I think we need 2 floor plans. Here is the floor plans, but here is how they are being used. If you don't, so I'm just saying, like, whichever classroom is in fact divided into 4 places, I think somehow that should be designated. That's my point.
Like a room inventory of, and I
Right,
think, and I think
so,
that we
like,
did,
here's where the walls are, but here's how they are being used, and let's show that.
We actually did that.
we have that, we did.
Yeah, we
do
have that, but-
So we can,
Yeah.
know.
But I'll get another copy. That's one of the reasons I put this together, because I think we've had so many different facilities discussions of different pieces of paper. We were trying to put it all in one spot. So we'll see if we can go back and find that map. We did it when we were talking about the construction. And we actually had it done in yellow. I just need to go find it and I'll put it in. I'll get it for you.
okay. All right, let's move along to the ECC, because we all, after having this discussion and hearing, we pretty much all said that all roads start with the ECC in terms of moving forward on our other facilities discussions. Ms. Pitko, followed by Mrs. Gerber.
There's a lot I could say, but I'm going to just try to keep it simple. I think at the end of the day, we do what's best for our students, right? Practically the entire staff wrote us letters saying they think it should be a one centralized model. I think we need to listen to them.
Mrs. Gerber?
I completely agree that we got a tremendous amount of feedback saying that people were advocating, both staff and parents were advocating for one site, to which I would say we need to know where that site is going to be. It can't be some hypothetical, some magical piece of land that exists, because that's not going to happen. I mean, we have to look at it very realistically. Now, if we are going to be saying, if this board says one site and that's it and we are not moving, we have to be realistic and say, to the best of my knowledge, and if I am wrong, I will be happy to stand corrected, my understanding is that there is no site, there is no building that is not a Fairfield Public School building or site that we can use for the ECC. That there has been, Dr. Jones and other staff have looked into other options that are not Fairfield Public School buildings, and there is nothing that can logistically or financially be used as an ECC, as a one-site ECC, which then leads us to, then it has to be a Fairfield Public Schools site, which means that we are looking at either taking one of our large 504 schools and creating an ECC site within that and redistricting 150 to 200 students out of that site, because if you take 8 classrooms, which is I believe what we need for an ECC, in a 504, or is it more, or is it less?
It's 10 right now.
Okay, so we're talking about 10. So basically, that would leave us with 14 K through 5 classrooms, which would mean that we'd have, what, 2 sections per grade.
Very small.
Right, it would be it would be smaller than any other elementary school we have in Fairfield. So we would be taking out, say, 150 to 200 elementary school kids, redistricting them and potentially impacting the middle and high school feeder plans. And we would be creating our smallest elementary school site within this building that would be sharing space with the ECC. And that would work in some ways because more of our 504 schools have air conditioning, and air conditioning is, as my understanding, is absolutely essential for any ECC site. So that's one option. Or we are looking at taking, as I believe Mr. Asa said earlier, one of our smallest sites, which would be Dwight, Jennings, or Mill Hill at this point, depending who knows what's going to happen with that. So that would be the other option. We would take one of those schools, we would completely redistrict all 300 to 380 students out of that school to other elementary schools in the district, and that would also impact the middle and high school feeder. Now, if we did it that way, at this point, none of those 3 schools I just mentioned have air conditioning. Dwight is not ADA compliant, so there would be a number of additional costs associated with that. Now, Jennings is slated for a renovation and expansion in 2021-22, Dwight in 2023-24. So perhaps that could be somehow utilized. And of course, Mill Hill right now is on track for this year, but again, there are so many unknowns with that. So that would be the other option. So I just think it's really important, because this board did say, and this is my understanding, that no one here supported closing an elementary school. Doing this is closing an elementary school. It's not closing it as it was done in the old days when we gave them away, or didn't give them away, but sold them and then wished we hadn't. We would still have this site, but I'm just saying, we said we couldn't close an elementary school. Now we would be basically saying we can close an elementary school. And I don't know where the rest of the board stands on that. That's just one concern of mine. Also, I'm concerned because the elementary school population will go back up again. So even though we might be able to do something like that now, and it might be kind of tight, how is that going to look 5, 10 years from now? So I just think those are issues that we really need to think about in terms of the long-range, enrollment projections for elementary school, and also, do we really want to redistrict 300 plus elementary school students, impact the middle and high school feeder plan for this? Or would we want to, as some board members have said, look into the possibility of having 2 sites, one at one elementary school, one at the other? That would be another thing that would then perhaps not create quite as much upheaval. If we did it at a 504 school, we might not have to redistrict anyone for that purpose. Not to say that there wouldn't be other reasons why people might want to redistrict. So, but just if we're just looking at the ECC issue, 2 sites would mean we wouldn't have to redistrict for the ECC. If we have 1 site, we are talking about redistricting anywhere from 150 to 300 plus students and impacting the middle and high school feeders. So I just think that's something that we really need to consider, and I look forward to hearing what the rest of the board has to say about where they stand on 1 versus 2, because that is the linchpin in terms of where we're going to go with all of these other decisions, in my view.
Mr. Asa.
So just first, let me just go to Mrs. Gerber's point. I did say I do not want to close an elementary school, and I don't feel that that would be that. I feel it would be more in the terms of repurposing an elementary school. When I say close an elementary school, I'm talking about like was done with Oldfield, and then it just goes to the graveyard and becomes a repurposed building on the town side and whatever it is, a lease to a child's garden. I think in the idea of repurposing an elementary school, which I think we would have to do if we chose a 1 ECC site, is that it would stay in the Board of Ed's control. It would still be a school, and it would, if the day ever came long after we're sitting in these chairs, where let's say the town population changed and a new school was built or whatever, it would be relatively easy per se to convert that school back to, let's say, a K-5. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. So I don't think we are talking about closing an elementary school. I think we're talking about repurposing it and keeping it in the inventory, just using it differently than a K-5. I agree with Mrs. Gerber in all of her points that she makes, and she makes some very good ones, in that when I heard from the parents and the staff, what I heard was what we have now is working. It's a great system. the continuity of care, the collaboration, everything. So one of my fears with a two-site system was inequality. So to Mr. Peterson's point, if you take what he said and you said that you have a system that's working for 80 to 100 kids, if you duplicated that at another site, and when I say duplicate, I mean duplicate. I don't mean sharing resources. I mean if you have one speech pathologist that's needed at this school, then you have the same at the other. You literally create two identical programs. So there is no inequality. There is no one kid's going to the better school, one kid's not. You know, there are some challenges with that. And do we keep it at the current ECC and develop a second site, or do we put it in two elementary schools, as Mrs. Gerber just mentioned, as a viable option, and reclaim the ECC current site at Ward for the high school, because we know they could use the space in the room. So I think what we need to do tonight is really get a consensus here, and I think we need to go out on a limb, and whatever heat we're going to take one way or the other, do it now. As Mr. Dwyer said, we need to make this decision now because it has a trickle-down effect. It has a trickle-down effect on redistricting, because if we make a one-site ECC, we're talking about a major redistricting project. If we do a two-site ECC in elementary schools, we're still talking about potential redistricting. So it's all coming into play, but how we do it matters. So I think my suggestion to the chair is, however we do this, of taking a sense of the body, because if we have 5 people on this board right now that would vote, to 5 or 6 people that are going to say, absolutely, we need a one-site ECC, well then guess what? We just talked about, we are repurposing an elementary school. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then we need to pull up our sleeves, put our boots on, and start shoveling through this process. So I would say that from what I've heard, if we could truly have 2 ECC sites that were replicated and identical and not have to take over an elementary school and be able to keep somewhat of the neighborhood schools, which I think we're going to have to look at, I would say at this point, that would be my inkling.
Mr. Peterson.
All right, there's a lot to unpack there. I don't know that I'm comfortable making a decision tonight. I mean, because it goes back to something that Mrs. Gerber said, and I've tried to model this kind of from a top-down, very gross basis in terms of capacity utilization, just in terms of elementary school population. How many classrooms would remain empty over the next 7, 8, 9 years if we took a whole school out of the rotation? And I think the problem is if we take too many classrooms, too many elementary classrooms out of the rotation and repurpose them for ECC, then we're going to get very, very crowded at the end of our projection, assuming that the demographics are correct and we're swinging back up. So I think that needs to be looked at very carefully. Because I've thought about, well, it would be reasonable if we could only if we could take out whatever is 165, I think, the current population of the ECC. If we had a building that was that capacity, that would be easy. But if we take out a whole Jennings or a whole Mill Hill or a whole Dwight or whatever, that is going to mess with the utilization down the road. And that's a thing that I think needs to be very carefully considered. Another point that I would think about with the ECC is also, we have heard that child find has become much more effective, and that we have, I don't know what we think of as the maximum ECC population in Fairfield is, but I think we need to consider what's the maximum possible size, what's the maximum wieldy, efficient size of an ECC program. Is it 250 kids? Can we run it as efficiently and productively with 250 kids as we could when we were really happy with an 84-kid program?
Can I just comment to one thing that just, since he
One thing, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Mancusi just to come up and maybe just share some information about the visits. I think it might be helpful to hear a little bit more about, ECCs that were in the elementary schools, ECC that were in one location.
And to Mr. Peterson's point, like, I'm not saying we're going to vote on this tonight, but I think we need to know if there are 5 people that are steadfast 100% that want a one site, I think they need to speak now, because it's really going to make a difference with the direction of these discussions. And I agree with you, we have a lot to do.
Yeah, we're not voting tonight. This was really not voting tonight, not going to force you to vote tonight, but I agree with Mr. Asa that this is, the purpose of this meeting is to really have these tough discussions. And, if you're leaning one way or the other, now is the time to share your thoughts so we can kind of get some direction to this discussion. The community's looking to us for leadership. I feel like we've been talking ourselves in circles.
I'll just make a small comment. I know people are never going to necessarily want to vote on this, but I'm very worried to continue to kick this, actually making a decision and making the next step forward down even another meeting. And we're not voting, but an actual sense of the body. If there are not 5 people who think we must have one location, then we've got the sense of the body and we can move further down the road on this conversation. But continuing to talk about what we're going to talk about, I feel tired as a board member. I can only imagine what the community must feel like. And so I just want to counter that maybe we could. We've been talking about this for long enough. I'd imagine most of us know what we think to get a sense of the body to move ahead in the next phase of the conversation.
So how do you feel?
I think
I want Mr. Mancusi just to come and share a little bit, because we're making these decisions, and we've heard from the ECC.
She just started talking about a thing. Let her finish what she was going to say.
I thought that she was finished.
If you're not finished, if you finish, then just say so.
we can let Mr. Mancusi say. I think we've all talked with Mr. Mancusi. I think it's helpful for the public to hear what Mr. Mancusi is going to say, but I don't suspect to learn new information right now from Mr. Mancusi that we haven't already discussed. So it's sort of 2 separate things.
When you say you, we, and
I don't suspect to learn new information unless there's something totally different you're about to present to us. But we've toured the facilities, and we've gone to the parent community meetings, and we've emailed, and I think most board members have. But
Have we talked with him about having a 300-student early childhood center?
I feel like we've talked about all of
In terms of questions, does anybody have any questions about having one location? I'm calling staff up here just to being that we are talking about making a major decision that affects the entire district. We haven't really spoken about it.
Oh, I agree.
No.
It's important for the community to hear what Mr. Mancusi has to say.
Good evening, everybody. Rob Mancusi, Executive Director of Special Education. During this process, not only did we have the opportunity to visit 5 other school districts that were recommended to us by our early childhood consultant that we worked with throughout this process, we were able to, meet with various focus groups for parents. We were able to meet with staff. We also gathered some input on, early childhood programming with the elementary leadership team. The challenge everybody knew that we were facing was that we don't have the space any longer at the Ward facility. There's no secret that the parents and the staff at, the Ward location really they're a team, they're a family, and they want that to be maintained moving forward. So discussing the challenge that we were facing, knowing that we do not have the space to handle the, the projected enrollment that we're looking at, we talked about what are the vital characteristics of a high-quality early childhood programming moving forward. And I think Kristen and I think all the input we received from parents and staff was to maintain that family type environment, so parents know that they have the support to maintain the collaboration and teamwork among staff, to make sure the staff has the experience working with preschool children and have expertise in early childhood education, and then to make sure that facilities are, preschool appropriate. So we believe programmatically that, as long as we have those non-negotiable characteristics, we can deliver high-quality programming. In one site, we can deliver the same high-quality programming in 2 sites. The districts that we visited, they were our neighbors, and it was interesting. We visited one district, had virtually every classroom, and one of our biggest challenges, we did have the lowest student with disabilities to non-disabled peer ratio of all the districts that we visited. And that is one of our priorities, to kind of increase the access our students with disabilities in the preschool program have to non-disabled peers or peer role model students. One of the districts we visited, they had 5 different sites among their districts. Within, I think there was 13 facilities, 13 schools in the district. They were spread out in 5 districts. They had, for every student with disabilities, they had 2 typical peers. And they capped their class sizes at around 14. Remember, we said we would love, ideally to keep ours at 12 with a 50-50 ratio. That's like our goal. We visited another school that had a 40-60 ratio, and that had half-day programs. And they had extended day programs through the IEP process for students who needed more individual or more extended programming than a half-day program. That one program that I just described was located in an elementary school, and they had outgrown their early childhood facility and were taking over some space in the elementary school in which it was located. Another district we visited was, they had a 4-day-a-week program. It was a 5-hour day. They were within 3 buildings. Their facilities were, they felt, in need of serious repair, and they were hoping to be able to get an early childhood facility built within the next several years in their district to address that need. Another district that we visited, the early childhood or the preschool program was located in a K-2 school where the kids, they shared the staff, the students and the preschool students, they participated in all the specials with the school staff, and they were part of the school. They just had a different wing of part of that pre-K through 2 school. And then another district we visited had one centralized early childhood location, but again, they were facing, the increased enrollment, and they had at that time taken over an additional classroom in the elementary school in which they were located. So, of all the 5 districts that we did see, the ones that were in an early childhood center were facing similar challenges as us and were expanding. They were all located within an elementary school, so they were expanding into the elementary school, versus us having to expand into a high school, which really would not be a good option. So,
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, hi, thank you for that. One question, the districts that had, it was just one district that has one site and everything else was spread out? I'm sorry.
well,
Just trying to
1, 2, 3 had one site.
Okay,
2 of them had expanded into the elementary school because of increased enrollment.
Okay, the ones that had one site, at least initially, how many students were in that one site?
I don't know that. I can tell you they had they didn't have as many classrooms as us, and their peer ratio was higher than ours.
Okay, but was it approximately the size? Was it like 160 like ours, or is it more like 84 like it was when we first had the program, like some time ago? Just ballpark.
I would say this one was similar to us. This is a much smaller district. This is a much smaller district. This district, which is in 5 buildings, is similar to us, and this one's a smaller district as well.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Jacobson?
I was wondering if we had done any research in terms of the state reports that are available on early childhood special education by town and correlating that to their structure. Have we looked at that yet in turn to see if there is any correlation there in terms of structure to outcomes, or have we not done that, or have you done that and you didn't find any relation?
Are you asking if we compared our early childhood outcome data?
Not ours, structure. So let's say you have districts that have one site, how they're performing on the state reporting that is done on early childhood special ed, versus those that have multiple sites and how they're
Yeah,
achieving.
we did not look at the early childhood outcome data from each of the districts we listed. That's easy enough to do. If the board would like us to do that, we
And there
can
might
do
not
that.
be any causation or correlation there, but it would be. I always try to look at the evidence behind decision.
I will say all the districts we did visit, like us, are high-performing districts. But we did not look at their early childhood outcome data and compare it to ours.
Okay, thank you.
Do you foresee the program changing if you were in one site with upwards of 200 children? Do you think that it would be the same, or do you think that, that nurturing environment would be different? Would you have to change the way you're delivering services, the way that teams are for children? I'm just trying to get an idea of what it would look like. Would it be any different?
Hi, I'm Kristen Bruno. I'm the special ed coordinator for early childhood. First of all, I want to thank the board. You have put so much time in visiting our facilities, thoughtful conversation, listening to parents, listening to our staff. I want to thank Dr. Jones and Mr. Mancusi for bringing the needs of the pre-K to the awareness of the board and the community. And Mr. Mancusi mentioned there's really 5 components we've identified as essential to our programming and our ability to deliver strong outcomes and continuously improve in delivering strong outcomes for children. So in terms of, this is a facilities meeting, so I'm going to lead off with that, and it's really to have safe, appropriate, and accessible classrooms, offices, therapy spaces, and play areas. So whether we're thinking about one site or 2 sites, that's something in terms of what the location should include. When we think about repurposing buildings, really thinking about, are they accessible? Are they safe? Are they the right size for the kind of work that we need to do with our students? And the board has mentioned the collaborative model is essential, a continuum of service, staff with preschool expertise, and then importantly, that strong sense of community for families. I think as we move forward with the short-term plan, there's lessons to be learned. So we've not existed in an elementary school other than in sort of isolated pockets. So I think there's lessons to be learned from that. Ms. McGoey and the Stratfield community have been wonderful and collaborative and welcoming. So I think as we live through the short-term changes, there'll be some things. Can we deliver equitable programming in 2 sites? What are the bumps in the road we're going to come across and have to problem solve as we move through next year?
I do think if your program grows to say 200 or more students, and and continues to grow, obviously your staffing would continue to grow, and then that would give us the opportunity to look at how we deliver service, and perhaps give us an opportunity to maintain like team approach to service delivery, where each team would kind of operate as two ECCs so they can maintain that. You know, the one thing was maintaining that kind of family atmosphere with our parents. They felt that their ECC teachers and staff were like their allies and very important people in terms of the development of their young child.
Can I weigh in on that too?
Dr. Jones.
Yeah, I would just say, and I think it goes back to when we first started talking about this, and I know we were using the rubric when we were evaluating buildings, you're never going to get an answer that says one program is better than the other. And if you look across the country where they have universal pre-K, which they're talking about right now at the state in Connecticut, there's a big push for it. There are lots of early childhood centers that are amazing, that operate just like your elementaries when you think about, is a 300 elementary better than one that has 500 children? It's really about the culture and climate that you create, whether there are 50 children or whether there are 200. Do you have the resources you need? All of those components that make an early childhood work. And I mean, I think we could sit here and talk about this for another 20 minutes, and you're not going to get an answer because there is no right way to do it.
Mr. Dwyer.
For a moment, let's think that Fairfield Ward doesn't have the facilities where they have them, and we could make a 220 early childhood center at Ward. The current center does not have the peer ratio that you think is best. If we had the 220 spaces, would we have the peer ratio that you think is best? Or do you need to be at
It
different...
certainly
element-
would
if I can
improve.
finish.
I mean, our
If I
peer
can finish my
ratio.
question. Or do you need to be at an elementary school closer to a neighborhood where you're more likely to accomplish the peer ratio? I'm not sure, I asked that because I'm not sure what the answer is.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is either. I can tell you, with the proposal of splitting the program in two for next year, it does give us the opportunity to increase our peer ratio, which we do feel is very important. I think everybody who participated in the focus groups, the staff, all felt that you know, increasing that ratio was important.
Ms. Picco.
Through the chair to Mr. Mancusi, how many students currently in the ECC model are receiving services, even just speech?
I'll know the current count on Friday when we do the March 1st count. As I say, it's always the first day of school for someone. We have students starting this week. I don't have the February number in front of me, but we continue to place kids.
So there's about 165 kids right now. Is that
I
right?
don't think we're quite there. I think that's the projection for the end
That's the
of the
projection
year.
for the
So
end of the year.
75% of the kids? 50% of the kids?
I would say 75 or higher are kids that are identified and receiving services.
We can easily get that number. I don't want
I mean,
to.
just asking for the sake of, even if it was a one-to-one model, you're still talking about over 200 children. So for every child who's receiving any service whatsoever, to have an atypical student with them, you're talking over 200 children, possibly 300. Because it is going to grow next year. Let's remember that. And like she said, every day they get new students. The proof is in the pudding. This model works. The staff has all said, this model works. And the effects on the long term for these children is tremendous. We are changing their lives. To change 1 year of that life is huge.
If I could just say, and I agree with you, our staff does a superb job, and you know, the proof is in the pudding with the relationships that they establish with their families. The same can be said by the parents I've spoken to for the students who are in the ECC program at Strathfield. They feel connected to their school. They feel connected to their teacher. They're very happy with the quality of programming they're getting for their, you know, their young children. they don't feel, at least the input I've gotten from the Stratfield parents that I had the pleasure to speak with, they don't feel because they're not being educated at the ward location, they're getting a, you know, a lower quality program.
That is good to hear. Ms. Maxinelli?
Just to clarify again, that 165 that we're talking about, are those enrolled in the preschool? Is that, I mean, in other words, there's two different sets of numbers that you deal with at the ECC. There's the preschool numbers, and then there's a child who will walk in, get half an hour of speech service, and leave, or other service. So two different numbers.
There are the classroom program that includes the classrooms at ECC ward and then the one classroom we currently have at Stratfield. So those are the numbers we're talking about when we talk about the peer ratio. There are students that receive itinerant services, either speech or social skills, or it could be OTPT as well. Those are not, we don't have typical peers in those therapy programs.
Right. So to clarify Mrs. Picco's remark, but just to be clear, when we are talking about 165, those are preschool numbers only. That is not including other students who would be needing to come into a building to get those additional services.
I believe that's the classroom count.
So that is a number I would like to hear. Is that what is the number for the preschool enrollment? What is the additional number of those students who are not part of the preschool enrollment but are walking into those buildings to get whatever you referenced as itinerant services? I would like that number.
And I think, just to clarify, the 160 came from where we ended last year. And so then we have a projection, but this program is very difficult because it's rolling all year long. So the 160 are children in preschool. The speech and itinerant number, we do have that, so we can bring that to just give you a sense, but just always know they're going to fluctuate, and they do all year.
But we can get you the itinerant number.
The March 1st counts.
Mr. Dwyer?
I'm glad Mrs. Leeper is between me and Ms. Pitko. I've listened to Ms. Pitko, and I've listened to the staff from the ECC, and I think everybody on this board knows that I am always inclined to support the staff viewpoint. So it pains me to say that in this instance, I just don't see a practical solution to a single center. There's too many costs to other school populations that Mr. Acer clearly laid out. But it strikes me that I've made it clear that I could accept and believe that we should aim at a two-site program. I think Ms. Pitko has made it clear what her viewpoint is. And at least as I'm listening to three other board members who have commented on it, I think I get the impression that they have signaled that they understand that a single location is nigh on to impossible, as much as they might like it. So I think Mr. Acer is correct. Giving the staff guidance, not a vote, but some guidance that says, where is the majority of the board leaning? I think it's time to lay that out clearly and than a, yes, I believe in this, but I also believe in that, and so I'm done.
Don't worry, I'm taking the sense of the body. Just want and does anybody have any additional questions for Mr. Mancusi? Ms. Brown?
I have one just question.
Yeah.
To clarify, Mrs. Pitko, you're talking about, so the 165 is total students, including typical peers.
I believe that's a projection for
Yeah,
the
but
end of this year.
Yes.
And you mentioned 300. So I was just talking about.
No, what I said was, if I asked her, of the 165, how many are receiving services? About 75%. So if every student who's receiving services also had an atypical peer, you're talking about well over 200 students. And if we're projecting higher next year, we could get to 300 students.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
If you accomplish the 50-50 that is the goal,
Yes.
could
Okay.
easily be to that number.
I didn't follow what you were saying, so thank you.
Mrs. Maxinelli?
I'll admit that I've been all along leaning towards the one site. And there's one part to this conversation that we haven't had yet, and I'm not opening that topic of conversation, but except to say I'm very curious, going back 15 years, would would the board make the same decision regarding one high school or two? And I don't think there is, and this has nothing to do with the staff, I don't think there is anything that could be done. If we, quite frankly, I would wonder if 3 sites versus 1 would be a better idea. I'm not saying to go to the 5-site model. I think that's a little bit too ambitious at this point. But when you set up 2 sites, yes, they might have the same number of this staff and that staff. It doesn't matter. The perception out there will be powerful that one is better than the other, and there might be some facts behind it, but I'm not saying there's a whole lot of logic. We hear all the time about the inequities between our 2 high schools, and yet on paper, and those administrators and that staff would argue, no, those sites offer the same programs, the same equal opportunity to education, they service our students the same. Yeah, right. They do. They have all of that, educationally speaking, but there is no question that there are 2 different cultures at the schools, and I'm not evaluating pros or cons. They are not viewed the same, and I don't think there is anything we could do to guarantee that these 2, if we just pick 2 sites, that they would be viewed the same in a way that we could control if we were at 1 site, where it's, if there's an ECC issue, we deal with that issue. I think from I'm just throwing out there that this is what's been forming my thinking, because I hear the point about 2. I've been speaking with someone who's in a district with multiple sites, and certainly one argument that's very, very powerful is that I think we might be best served to move the ECC out of Ward, period, if that's, as one of our sites, because of the powerful work that's done to transition students to kindergarten. I think that's one way that we actually could, strengthen our ECC program. But, I put that out there because it's something that we won't hear about for another 10 years when likely none of this group is still on the board. Most of us will have kids, long gone from the system. But we're going to hear the legacy of the decision of 1 ECC or 2. And yes, it's a smaller group. It's not the same voice, and obviously we don't have the same crowd as I have heard they had for those debates of 1 high school or 2. But this still is going to resonate powerfully with a group of parents who are strong advocates, very vested interest in what's happening with their children in a vital point in their lives. And I'm not saying that I'm just saying that's part of what's shaped my inclination toward 1 site, is just yes, all the staff, yes, all of the parents, yes, I believe that what you could do with that leadership and the collaboration, et cetera, but it's also that additional X factor, which it is powerful. So I add that to the conversation.
If I could just comment on that, one of the, part of we get an annual performance report from the State Department of Education on certain performance indicators that we have to report on annually. And we can compare our performance to other districts. One of the indicators is our early childhood outcome data, which if the board were to choose to split into the ECC into 2 sites, we're still going to always do the early childhood outcome data, which is only one metric that we're measured on. But you could conceivably compare the performance of one group of students in Site A versus one school group of students in Site B to dispel that concern.
And so when one scores higher than the other, you're going to just start redistricting all of those poor little children. What kind of a monster are you?
No.
Hey, I'm just giving you a small taste of
No.
what we're walking into.
And the community should recognize that as
Please
a
know that was
rhetorical
hypothetical.
question.
Yes, I thank you for telling me it's hypothetical.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make your heart stop.
No,
or
I'm
anything.
I'm just saying we believe that we can provide our youngest learners high-quality program in 1 site or 2 sites.
And that's where I say, for the record, 1, I would expect you to say that. 2, I have no doubt that it is what you fervently believe and that you've seen implemented. I'm just saying we as a board are the ones making the call. we as the board are the ones who will be living with this legacy past when we're maybe even interested in the topic, but somebody else will be. And to the board member a few elections removed from myself, I'm handing it to that person. And we know, we've all heard the discussions with Ward versus Ludlow. We hear them now among our 3 middle schools. The moment you split from one site, you open yourselves up to that, and this is with a population that I think we need to be especially sensitive to. As I said, I don't know if that convinces anybody, but it's just something that's factored into my thinking.
Okay, we'll take a sense of the body right now. Okay, Mr. Asa. Thank you. All right, so I want to get a sense of the body, 1 site or 2. Ms. Picco. We know where Ms. Picco stands. Ms. Leeper?
2 sites. And I'm sensitive to all of the points that have been made about 1 site and keeping the kids together. I don't want to rehash everything. But I just don't think, if we talk about the importance of collaboration, we can't, in my opinion, in good faith, then move half of a 504 school out to put in our 1 ECC location and then tell all of our remaining grades that you only can have 2 sections. Because then we're taking away a lot of ability for each of those grades to really optimize their ability to collaborate with such a small remaining school. And I also don't want to tell one of our smaller schools that we're now redistricting you all out to make this our 1 ECC location. And I also think we're going to have a really hard sell to the town to say we need to refurbish a school to meet all of the criteria to be ADA compliant and have everything that we would need in that site also. I think 2 sites is, we're talking about potentially having 2 sites of 150 students. So I think that is as close as duplicating the 2 programs we can get, and there's always going to be perception issues. There's perception issues with our 11 elementary schools. That's not something we're going to be able to completely avoid. That's partially human nature, and we'll have to do our best to communicate with the communities in our town about why 2 are meeting the needs of our students and our children.
I would stay with my 2 sites. I'd say multiple sites if I was looking 20 or 30 years down the road, but 2 sites I think is something that is realistic. I congratulate Mrs. Maxon Kennelly for the introducing the concept that trying to compare perception of the original ECC site with a elementary site is going to be a difficult thing to accomplish, and it might be in the board's best interest for the staff to answer that question and perhaps propose 2 elementary school sites so that they can be designed to be like and similar as best they can. So 2 sites.
I would say 2 sites as well. I stated a number of reasons why I just feel I'm concerned about the upheaval that having 1 site. Either the 504 option with a very small elementary site or repurposing an elementary school. I'm just not sure if since we have the facilities at some of our elementary schools to be able to have 2 sites and not create the upheaval and the financial cost that would ensue as well. I would just be concerned about that.
I already stated what I said, 2 sites at this point.
Ms. Jacobson?
I think this is, we've talked about this so much because it is so maybe that we're so torn about it ourselves, or at least I have been for a very long time, and I admit that I too at the beginning was leaning towards 1 site. But when we look down, when we get down to mapping and you get down to classroom space and you get down to impact the ripple effect of those decision makings, and in addition, the financial piece of it as well. But for me, it's really the ripple effect that it would have, and the fact that this is growing so much. I'm not sure that even if we overtook one elementary school at a proper capacity, that we wouldn't outgrow that as well at some point. So for me, for right now, I'm leaning towards 2, preferably brand new, fresh spaces.
Ms. Mascanelli? Mr. Peterson?
My inclination is to say 2, but I want to qualify that a little bit because I don't know that I entirely ascribe to Mr. Dwyer's notion that it's nigh impossible to have one site. I do think that if we followed an option where we, say, took a smaller elementary school and repurposed, that it would open up other opportunities for the program, such as improving the peer ratio, which would be a good thing. Again, going back to the thing that Mrs. Gerber said and the thing that I was working on in Excel a lot during this process, I'm very wary of taking an entire elementary school of classrooms, of K-5 classrooms, out of the rotation with where I see enrollment going over the next decade. So all that said, I have to lean more on the 2 side.
I am also leaning towards 2 sites for the facilities issues that board members have stated, but also I believe, as staff said, that the collaborative model really lies with the people, and I think that you can have that in 1 site or you can have it in 2 sites. It's just a commitment that comes with that. I'm also concerned about the peer ratio. I'm concerned that if we have it in 1 location, we just may not have the enrollment of typical peers. And I think that by maybe having it in 2 sites, it might be more marketable as a preschool, and that peer ratio will be closer to where we want it to be. I see some benefits of being in an elementary school, just with transition, just from my own personal experience, that I think that it can be, there's a lot of benefits to that, in my own personal opinion. And I'm curious to see what the next year brings from the Stratfield model. You know, it pains me to say that because I love the 1 ECC site, but at the time there was so fewer children there that I'm not sure that having potentially 300 children in 1 site would provide the same nurturing environment that my son had, as opposed to having a specialized space in a smaller school. So, unless something changes, I think that we are going to move forward with just keeping it in 2 sites, whether or not those 2 sites are, I guess the location of where they will be long-term is the next discussion. Let's move forward. Next discussion in terms of 2 sites for the ECC. Any thoughts based on the information that we've been given and what we think the physical space should look like?
Can I just say, before you decide on the 2 sites, when we were touring Stratfield and we were having conversations, we already talked about some of the physical limitations of the building. Already, the first discrepancy is what students could attend the building and which would have to attend the Word site. So before we go making this decision, can we come up with a list and tour some places to make sure that they can physically handle this population of students?
We absolutely can. And right now, I share the concerns about Stratfield. I don't want to necessarily make the assumption that that is going to be the site. I think that we need to talk about what an ideal site would look like in terms of the physical space, the playground, HVAC, location. In these discussions, Ms. Jacobson brought up time on the bus. I mean, there's other things that have been mentioned that we really haven't spoken about. Having 1 location, on the eastern side of town, those children on the western side of town, they're on the bus for a long period of time. Maybe if we have 2 locations that are, on opposite sides of the town, we might shorten the bus ride for those 3-year-olds. I think that those are the kind of things that we now, in this brainstorming session, in terms of putting ideas out there, the things to talk about and think about, that maybe we need to kind of factor that in, that haven't been on the list. So we're not making any decisions in terms of where the site would be, just bouncing some ideas off of each other, and if there's sites that we need to tour, then we'll go tour them. Mr. Dwyer.
But I do think we're giving staff the direction to say, okay, if the board's going to consider and not vote yet, but consider a 2-site long-term solution to the growing ECC population, then propose what those 2 sites might be and what the needs are to make those 2 sites what we want them to be, and then have the board say, yeah, okay, that meets our requirements as a majority.
Mrs. Gerber.
Well, yeah, I think it's important. I mean, again, we haven't voted, and if it turns out, I mean, I don't want to like set us back or anything like that, but what if we look at the presentations for the 2 sites and say, you know what, actually this isn't going to work. I just think, but we need to understand what will the different sites, like the pros and cons of the different sites. This would work because of X, Y, and Z. This site has this, which would be optimal. This site doesn't have this, which wouldn't be optimal. We need to understand, and that's something that we'd have to get that guidance from staff. Correct?
We would need guidance from staff, but I think that we also need to I would like to some guidance from members of the board of their thoughts on where the site should, I think that people have opinions about where the sites possibly should be.
I think it would make sense to obviously have it in a school that already has air conditioning. Because yes, and the whole air conditioning conversation is another one that, and I agree, I fully support air conditioning all of our schools, but I am also realistic in knowing that that's not going to happen tomorrow. So, but if we are talking about, being able to plan realistically for doing something with 2 ECC sites, if that is in fact what ends up happening, that we need to have schools with air conditioning. So that automatically will rule out some schools.
It might, but if it's a long-term plan, if we're looking long-term,
Right.
or it might change the direction
Well,
of the
for instance, like Osborne Hill isn't supposed to get air conditioning until sometime after 2028. So, and North
okay.
Stratfield doesn't even have air conditioning in the long-range plan.
And
So-
what if everything else about Osborne Hill, like, it would be a great space for, it's a central location.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And that we say, well, that would be a great location to have a preschool, let's move the air conditioning up on that school.
There would be that too. So, yeah, I mean, but,
So,
yeah, no, I agree. I'm just saying, like, I think we do need to get some sense from staff of what are the essential aspects of if we are going to have 2 ECC programs that are going to be equal in terms of, or as equal as possible in terms of the facilities that they are housed in, what does that look like?
has that changed from the
No, we applied
that-
we
that we
applied a
had.
rubric to all of the buildings, so we can bring that back. Because we didn't share the rubrics with you, I don't think. I think we told you what was on the rubric.
Hey, you
but
gave us a sense of, I mean, I know the air conditioning was something,
the
ADA
playground,
The
the
parking for
ADA
staff.
accessibility, parking,
Right.
all.
But I think it would be helpful to say, these schools
Right.
have this today. We could have these schools have it within 5 years. Just to get a sense. I don't think it's unrealistic.
No, it's
I
not- it's
just,
not- it's
okay.
not- it's not-
No,
it's
people
not-
are looking at me like.
No, it's not unrealistic because they already started the work. The difference is to go to a school like Burr or one of those, we would have to redistrict some kids out because there was not enough room to put the second site right now. So any of the schools that they already looked at as possible ECC second sites, they did part of that work. What were those schools?
Yeah, I think that's a totally different discussion, because when we went in to look, we were looking, where is space right now? So I think that's part of the board's next discussion is, are you going to redistrict? Because if you are, then everything is open season as far as the buildings and the capacity to be able to take a preschool building that maybe we, said it wasn't going to work because, and a prime example would be McKinley. We actually really loved McKinley, but to try to put pre-K in there really wasn't the space. But, you know, it had air conditioning, there's already a pre-K playground, so things like that that we had to take off the original rubric maybe would come back on, but we'd just have to go back and look at it from a different lens, that if there was nobody in the building, would you be able to, you know, what would it take to have pre-K there?
Dr. Jones, it just goes back to what Jessica was saying, is that you already have this information. We just need to hear it from you in order to make further decisions.
Mr. Asa?
I see what Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Pitko are saying in the fact that we have this, but we don't have all the information. I like more, because I like the idea of obviously touring the schools that would be potential sites, but what we were looking at before was a second location for the short term for 3 to 4 classrooms. What we're talking about now, the sense of the board was 7 to 2, that it doesn't appear that this board is want to bite off closing or repurposing an elementary school for a one-site location. So to me, it opens the discussion back up to potentially looking at schools in a different light, because we're looking at 2 schools now potentially if we were to take it out of Ward. So it's a different scenario. So we don't have all of the information, as you say, because we need to relook at this, and the staff is going to have to spend considerable time on this and look at it from a different scope and say, are they going to propose leaving it at Ward and then putting it at a different elementary school with more classrooms? Are they going to take it out of Ward and put it into 2 elementary schools, let's say Holland Hill and Mill Hill? I mean, all of these are potential scenarios now that the board has said they're leaning towards a 2-site location. So I think, whereas before we were somewhat restricted because we had to make this decision on a quick term, now we have the system set up for the next few years while we can determine, or maybe less, but while we can determine the proper location of 2 sites. So to answer your question, I would say I would like staff to look at all of the schools, look at the waterfall chart, look at what schools, and if they're recommending one that isn't equipped now, do we need to revise the waterfall chart to push projects around to make it work? Because now the waterfall chart didn't take this into consideration. So now I think as a board, we need to look at our priorities, and this is obviously a priority in the coming years that we need to add in and possibly revamp. So I think, again, my suggestion would be that staff look at this globally through the 11 elementary schools, come up with the reasoning and their recommendations, and if those schools are prepped and ready now, awesome. If not, I don't want to put it somewhere because it's ready now, when if we wait another year to get it right in another location that solves transportation, busing, equality, I would rather look at those. So I don't want to rush this, but I also want to move it along. So what I'm saying is, if we need to revise our chart and our flow, so be it. But I think that's why we have to have these discussions. I don't think we can have these discussions until they start putting together, you know, some guidance for us.
You don't have any inkling about where you think 2 locations might be, just geographically?
Well,
And again, this goes back to like having a discussion of just a free flow of ideas.
Yeah, I think Holland Hill has always been a likely location for me. In the long term, I think the seats, the space is able to be had there. It's going to be renovated. It's going to be available. So I think I would have loved for that to have been an option. It wasn't right now, but I think I would like to have that one in the future. It's centrally located, and you know, possibly maybe Mill Hill. And maybe we use that justification to go for a bigger school so we can fit it there. That would service the kids on that side of town, right? And we're already saying if we built it to 504 now, we don't have the kids to fill it without taking them out of Sherman to move them to Holland Hill or Mill Hill. We can really look at this in a way to utilize this and actually go to the town bodies and say, okay, we came to you and said we were basing this off of these projections. Now, our plan is to look at this. So it may push Mill Hill back. Because if this board really wants to look at that school as being a possibility, then there's no way we're going to be able to present to the town bodies this May and June, or April and May, and say, okay, we have a plan, we're going to put them there. So, yeah, I would like to look at that, but at the risk of potentially slowing that project.
Ms. Jacobson?
I have a few competing thoughts on this. One is, since it seems that some members of the board have expressed an interest in possibly looking at a top-down redistricting, I think that placing this somewhere at this point is premature in the sense that it would become enveloped, I would assume, into that plan. So that's my first thought on it. My second thought is, without that a part of the picture, I have always said from the beginning that I felt that at least having one of them be very central located in terms of the transportation concerns that I have, that be a consideration. For me, if I was going to, wave a magic wand, they would both be centrally located. They would be as close to each other as possible. Staff would make it easier for staff to get between them, etc. If possible, it may not work out that way. I also want to avoid anything more like east-west-y happening, but, there's different needs in different parts of town that are being developed in different ways. So these are all, that's a multi-factored conversation and decision. And again, I agree. I'm looking forward to hearing what staff recommends in terms of being able to build two, if not equal, exactly, comparable programs in terms of the building space and what works for the staff as well and for the families. So those are just a few of my thoughts on it, and so I'm hesitant to say here or there. Holland Hill was always one of my places that I felt, because the enrollment projection at this point allows for the most movement into that building with the least disruption out. So that was always one of my thoughts. Plus, it's centrally located, so if that gives you any help, I don't know.
And I'm not looking for a decision. I'm looking for just what you're thinking in terms of when we had the discussion about the ECC. I know the board members had strong thoughts about certain schools that weren't really talked about. And now's an opportunity just to kind of put it out there, to either to talk about it, to move it forward, or to just get it out there and have it be done with. Ms. Maxicanelli.
Going with the idea of two, I guess my thought of pairings had been McKinley and Holland Hill, McKinley and Burr. And a number of things appealing about both. First of all, I like the idea of McKinley and Burr. I like the fact that right now, currently both ward, so there's none of that, oh, that's going to be the ward feeder, that's going to be the Ludlow feeder. I mean, that's something that was very vehement about when we were talking about opening up Stratfield, that one of those sites can't, ECC versus Stratfield, one can't be known as it's feeding these kids and the other. I think the more these kids mix, the better. I wish we could do more mixing in middle school, more mixing in high school. We've seen the result of not mixing. So, I agree that McKinley has a lot of positives to it. I also think that it would be a nice service to kids we'd like to see enrolled in preschool, to have something close by in that school that kids could walk to with their parents. I think that's a preschool population that I think would be educationally very well served by having a very accessible preschool option to them. Holland Hill, obviously, beautiful new building. They certainly have some space. My concern, and also I like the idea, as had been mentioned with Stratfield and the ECC, that McKinley and Holland Hill being in close proximity to each other would be better as a staffing issue, perhaps. Because another thing that I would like to not have, and this was, again, the advantage of one versus two sites, is I can just hear it being 5, 6, 7 years down the road of, okay, well now not only, we don't just need the staff to service these kids, now we need more administration oversight, because we've grown too big in two sites, which wouldn't have happened in one. Well, at least being in close proximity, we would avoid that, and at least Holland Hill is somewhat central enough. But Burr does have room, and so I think that presents some and they have a preschool, they already have their playground, correct? Correct. So, that already has some infrastructure there that would be needed, so that's just a very initial thoughts.
I'll only say that I think I heard Dr. Jones say that they have some rubrics that they used to evaluate. Now that we know we're going to go with two sites, pending the results of here's where the 2 sites would be, and the 7 who think that that made sense still think it makes sense. I'll rely on an analysis of the rubrics to say here are the 2 best sites. So I don't have any preconceived notion of any particular elementary school. I'd rather follow the judgment of all of the rubrics combined.
Can I have one quick follow-up to that? The only thing I'd say, though, is that this needs to be a new rubric. You know, this is completely different, so there has to be a whole new rubric. The old one isn't.
Correct.
It has
yeah.
some good information on it, but it can't be used now.
I have no doubt that it'll be changed based on the conversation tonight, and then the schools will be measured accordingly.
Ms. Lieber?
I just want to second, I'm interested in the Mill Hill idea. And I know that really throws a wrench into a lot of things, but if it's something we could communicate with the Mill Hill building community or whatever the appropriate step would be into exploring that, I'm curious about it.
Ms. Drazen?
With regard to Mill Hill, you know, I'm interested in that site. I'm not necessarily saying it needs to be 504. It still may need, it still could be, you know, I'm just saying that site per se. So.
Okay. And I'm asking you to vocalize this as we have discussions about, you know, my Sherman and where kids in the southern part of town, you know, if you put a ECC in one of those schools, that is going to affect other decisions that are made. I agree that following staff's guidance on this, but for our purposes and our discussions, I think it's as much information as we have of what each other is thinking, the better.
Just one thought for Dr. Jones. In your analysis, I'm just wondering if we have a stronger feeder area or not, because I had asked this question to you previously. You know, are our typical peers coming from all over? Are our ECC kids coming from all over? Like, whatever works best for the populations that we're serving as well is a consideration, you know? I mean, and I don't know the answer to those.
Yeah,
and I don't need to know the answer, but it's just for, that's a concept to think of.
Yeah, we did
as-
pull all of that
yeah.
data when we were making the decision, and the only building that had virtually almost no children was Dwight. I think it was like 1 or 2. And then the rest of them are all very equal, between 10 and 15 children. So,
Regardless of their size.
Yeah, yeah. It was really interesting actually when we pulled the data, just because it was so balanced. But Dwight is the one building where there really weren't children coming from Dwight to ECC, and that may be the bus. You know, it is a long bus ride. So I don't know what's behind that.
So
but-
that's good to know. I mean, that's just another piece.
I think it's something to consider, and as we talk about preschool in general, and I know the Finance Committee was going to do some work on that, what is going to make us more attractive to just, you know, people that want to use our Fairfield Public Schools as a preschool? And I think location could play into that. Are you going to be driving 30 minutes potentially to drive your child to preschool? Just something. And so I was curious also about just the demographic in terms of enrollment, and if the change to Stratfield has changed that at all from Burr.
It'll be interesting as we're enrolling right now, to see what happens for next year's enrollment, to see how it changes going into the second year.
Ms. Picco?
So I have to consider feeder pattern, because if you pick McKinley and Burr, they're the same feeder pattern. But if you pick Holland Hill and Burr, they're different feeder patterns. It's just a thought.
Right now, because the way we looked at it was that because ECC didn't fall feeder pattern at all.
Right. And also,
You're talking about kids being moved out of the building.
I'm talking about once they
because
leave-
of the space it takes up, that there would be children from that building who would then be redistricted elsewhere.
or that they're in the same feeder pattern.
That they're in the same general feeder pattern. The idea was you were having them move easily into a kindergarten type model. So for, you know,
Well, I think I know what you're saying, but I think that for ECC, it may not be by feeder pattern. It may just be by location. So if you're going to, I would think that if you're going to preschool in McKinley, chances are you're going to be, you know, maybe living closer to that and have friends that are hopefully going to your elementary school, or at least living in your neighborhood. Maybe not, but. And in terms of the feeder pattern, to Mr. Peterson's, you know, something that he was open to is just looking at top to bottom of, you know, looking at redistricting, that I don't want to lose track of, in terms of the bigger picture, longer term, that might be something that we that we consider, or at least, be open to that option. Anything, Ms. Mascanelli?
I'll go on the record right now as saying there is no way I'm making a motion to extend this meeting, so in the next, say, 10 minutes, if we can come up with a path forward. Because obviously there were a few more items on the agenda, which,
I thought we had a path forward. We're going with 2, and we've asked.
No, I'm not talking about with the ECC. I'm talking about like what is the meeting schedule from here? Is this now all going to be tried to be done on our regular meeting agendas? That's more what I mean.
Well, if the board is okaying just postponing the review of approved redistricting and planning principles, that was just a quick review that I considered taking off this agenda. It was on the last one. That was before you got the binders. That information is in the binder. I think that just wanted to make sure that everybody had it. And discussion of current facility utilization rates was really just, again, just make sure that you take a look at that of where we are as we're having these discussions about the ECC, what buildings have space, what don't.
Christine, are you going to reschedule a town hall meeting? I really think we need to hear from all our stakeholders.
All right. So let's move right on to next steps.
Can I mention this one too, just because that went in the binder?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to mention, this should be at your seat, but this was a question that was raised at the Finance Committee, and it really was just trying to understand how walkable are our elementary schools, because I know for me, I was actually surprised, like how many students are actually on the bus. I thought they were more walkable actually than they are when you see the numbers. But I just wanted to make sure this would go in Section 7.
And if I can ask one question about that, both Mr. Peterson and I want to know, where are the -5 students at Tomlinson?
Probably, I would imagine they could be in those condos right across the street. Is that what you mean?
No, the fact that there are 667 bus riders, but 662 are in the school.
Well, I'm using the October count on the right-hand side, and Mr. Fickey, those are the numbers when he ran the routes right at the beginning of the year. So it could be the difference in, a couple of weeks.
Because then my separate question, because I just did the math to get the walker list, but there's actually 2 different types of walkers. There are those that are geographically designated as a walker, but it's always been my understanding that there were students, I think it was usually especially at Mill Hill, who are within the geographic bounds where they should be a walker, but due to the state of the sidewalks, they don't have that designation. Is that just urban legend, or is that?
No, yeah, Mr. Fickey does look at, first they look at the distance, and then they look at things like safety. Is there, a dangerous crossing? Is there not a sidewalk in the area, so they need to be picked up? And so Mill Hill was one we had noted, actually has I think 10 kids that are, he has 11? Yeah, you'll see it's a real low number. But the number on the left is the actual, those are children who are eligible to ride the bus.
Yeah, can I? Actually, you brought up Mill Hill. I was a little taken aback because we just got an email about walkers for Mill Hill, but there only are 11 walkers.
Yes. Now, that doesn't mean that they may, I guess, walkers. So, their parents wouldn't drop them off. Although they might drop them off down the road and let them walk down the sidewalk.
No, it just jumped out at me because we just...
Due to the snow removal.
That's correct.
Correct.
That's
so
correct.
I just was a little taken aback because it was made to sound as if there was a serious, significant issue, but if there are only 11 walkers at the entire school, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, they're in cars and buses.
Yeah.
You're right. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
What struck me is when you think of Mill Hill neighborhood, and you think of where Burr is, and you think of the morning and afternoon traffic that comes down Burr or comes across Congress, absolutely no sidewalks anywhere, to think that Burr has 50 walkers and Mill Hill only has 11, it just...
Remember, it's also by house, because there may be houses next to the school that don't have children in them. So these are, when you look at those bus riders, those are actual eligible bus riders. So like maybe the houses that are closest to Burr that would be, for instance, walkers, just don't have children in the homes.
Yep.
Or Mill Hill, vice versa.
This represents eligible walkers and probably represent the parents who drive their kids to school even though they're eligible for walking. And that's why the lines going into Burr are long.
Yeah, those are the children who their parents can put them on the bus. They may choose not to put them on the bus, right?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so next steps. The town hall, we have a date of April 30th. Any other suggested next steps? Next steps
That's
for
a Tuesday, right? April 30th.
April 30th, yeah.
Is it 7?
7:30, which?
7:30.
7:30.
7:30.
No, I didn't have one there.
So is that a facilities meeting, or it's just open?
That's the town hall. Now,
Okay.
that was going to be tonight's town hall
Okay.
that got postponed. So our town hall that can be open to anything is going to be April 30th. Now, I am open to next steps in terms of our facilities discussion of reaching out to the community. We can go and talk to SEPTA. We can have, I'm open to suggestions right now. We talked about town planning and zoning. Would you like them to come to our meeting? Do you want any kind of reports for future agendas?
Yeah, I'm curious, in terms, that's the big macro picture, so between them and the strategic plan committee, again, because I have no idea what they're producing. If they're just going to have big visionary statements, okay, I don't think that would help our conversation at all. But if they're coming back with something, very definitive, we're moving forward with these I just don't know. So maybe at least an email to them asking, but to both of those bodies, and so therefore I also throw out there, I don't know if it's worth it to move March 12th to a 7 p.m., so again, barring needing executive session for anything, moving it to something like a 7 o'clock start time to allow a little bit more time, as opposed to trying to have this conversation at 11:30, 11:45 at night, which, yes, I'd stay for, but I just don't think that's the most productive time. And we're not taking huge, big steps at a time here, so that's just one other thought.
You guys can go. Staff can leave.
Yes.
Well,
Mrs. Gerber?
Well, just in terms of next steps, I think one next step is to be getting the information about potential ECC sites to get that. I mean, I think that's a first step, really, because I think, again, that will then dictate what direction we're going in, or it could, at least, depending on what the sites are and what the impact is on those sites and how that might trickle down to other things. So I think that, to me, would be a fairly high priority, would be to try to, within reason, obviously, because I know staff has a lot on their plate, but to get some sort of a sense so that hopefully we will be able to have a conversation talking about what those sites will look like if two jump out at us, or we might have to debate, some of us may feel one is better than another or something, but we won't really know until we have a better sense of how all of the criteria looks.
That is a next step for staff. Any next steps for the board?
For me, I think for me, I think the redistricting question has to be on the top of the next agenda that we're talking about facilities. And to me also, I think that guiding principles for redistricting has to be the first thing talked about. Are we willing to look at these? And because I think we do need to give our consultant some clear direction, or otherwise we're going to get 7 or 8 different potential things that you could do because they don't have clear direction on what we're trying to accomplish. And I think the redistricting discussion in terms of the principles might accomplish that.
Do you feel like we should have that discussion as more of a community discussion, or just the board? Getting the sense of the body on that. There was a board redistricting committee that met and got feedback from the community. in the essence of time, that we could sit down and we can go through the redistricting principles and, you know, say we still approve of that, don't approve of that, want to add that, or do you think should be a community discussion right out of the bat?
It's kind of like a town hall style meeting.
Just focused
Just
on
have
this
an
one
earlier
issue.
one where we just talk about this.
I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that we have an awful lot of meetings coming up on a lot of different topics, and I think one of the reasons why April 30th was the first time we had the chance to have the town hall is that this is probably one of the first dates that we could do it, knowing that we have other meetings that we are scheduling, and plus we have the budget and you know, little things like that.
No,
so.
it would be, you know, later in April, but it doesn't, the April 30th date was partially availability of this room. You know, if we want to have more, reach out to different constituencies, we could do that, not televised. We could have it, you know, the last redistricting committee was not, you know, a televised meeting. It was at a school in the afternoon or an early evening. And I'm not pushing for it. I'm just trying to get,
Right.
you know, in
I'm also
terms-
just concerned about us biting off more than we can chew. I just think we all have a lot on our plates, and we will have more on our plates coming up in the weeks and months to come. So while I absolutely agree that we need to be having these conversations, I also don't want us to overload and not be able to have any kind of maybe perhaps we would want to, especially in the interest of time, continue this conversation on March 12th, because after next week, we may have a better sense of what our availability is.
Okay.
That's,
I will
and this
I
is
will
me,
add,
but,
nope,
yeah.
I will add the redistricting principles to the March 12th agenda, just as a review, and there will be public comment on that. So they can get some feedback from the public then. Ms. Jacobson.
It may not be for the board, but I just think pieces of information is what is the current status of Walter Fitzgerald in terms of are they doing the work or not? Because that will be playing into our decisions in terms of what space we have available or not. So I'm very curious to know what's happening with that as part of the conversation. And then the other piece, what was I going to say? Can't remember what it was. What size are we going to be using in terms of if we start talking about planning and movement and whatnot? Do we foresee waiting until we know what size is going to be approved or what we agree to do on terms of Mill Hill? Or are we going to be looking at multiple scenarios with that size, with different sizes? So those are not, that's a rhetorical question at this point, but I don't know how to look at that at this point.
Just as a reminder, my cell phone says 10:57. Okay. So I think we have 3 more minutes without a resolution.
I don't think we're going to be knowing Mill Hill size or moving that much forward. We'll probably know more from town bodies before we move really further with any kind of redistricting plan. All right, so redistricting on the review of the principles will be on the March 12th agenda. Ms. Pitko?
Motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second?
Any other question?
No. Motion to adjourn? All in favor? Motion passes 9-0.
I might as well just stay here. No, we have snow call in the morning. We'll see what the weather's doing.